Okay, quick music disclaimer here. I do not own the rights to this music, which belongs to the rightful owner, who is the intoxicating mind of Dr. Frankenstein. So he made my intro and my outro, and I hope you guys enjoy. Check them out on Spotify and YouTube, and no copyright infringement is intended. Have a good day.
A clear choice of good versus evil, of right versus wrong.
Twisted Tales.
Welcome back to Twisted Tales, folks. Now, my next tale is going to be a continuation of episode number 67, Clayton Miller. So, tonight, I actually had the fucking pleasure of speaking to Steve. Amazing person, by the way, and this guy will go above and beyond for anybody. Now, we got to bullshitting today. We texted, and I know I've been busy as shit, he's been busy as shit, so it was nice to actually have a little bit of free time to sit down and talk about a little bit of remaining case stuff. So, I'm going to give you this episode here, and me and Steve, we set this episode up tonight, so thank you very much for that, man. I really appreciate it. And now, let's get into Twisted Tales. Hey, Steve, how are you?
I'm good, buddy. How about you?
Oh, I'm excellent, man. I think we got the volume thing all situated now.
That's a very good thing. No use in me talking away, blabbing about the details of important stuff if nobody can hear what I'm saying.
No, that makes sense too. And I felt bad with the audio for that one. Like that lady that commented there, she was like, really.
I'm the one who didn't know what they were doing and didn't have my mic level turned up high enough. That was the issue there.
Oh, right. Even the connection with mine between the Wi-Fi wasn't the best either. I actually unplugged my modem, so everything will run straightforward from now on. So we should be good to go now.
All the better.
Yes, sir. Well, try to think of where we left off there last time. We were going on about what was it there?
Well, it's not so much where we left off the last time, actually. It's more like where we started off, because it was in the beginning that we had the volume issues.
That's right.
Thinking that maybe, well, this time through, maybe what we should do is let somebody know, let anybody, your listeners know, why I'm qualified to speak about what I'm speaking about, because we never actually did go into that part of it very much before. I didn't know Clayton, and I didn't know his parents until I met them for the first time in November of 2014. And in 2015, after the reports came out from CERT and Dr. Bose, and I saw what I really believed were literally be laughable if it wasn't for the seriousness of the subject matter, the quality, the lack of quality of the report, especially the one from CERT, inspired me to tell the Millers that if there was any way that I could help them with anything, that I would do so. I had been retired since a few years at that point. I was looking after my father when my mother passed away, and had a lot of time on my hands because Dad didn't actually need care full time. But I was hanging around the house with him full time, so he knew that he had backup. His main thing was mobility issues. Anyway, so early on, Maureen and I decided that we were going to do our own version of what the CERT had reported on and correct everything that they had gotten wrong, because almost everything that they have there is wrong. But after we had done that, that's when I first got to know the Millers, and I was going to their place on a regular basis, spending time at their kitchen table and going through paperwork and writing up our own report. After we were well into that, and the RCMP files that they had been waiting for 25 years, actually, at that point, finally came through. And it just so happened that my dad and I were heading to Halifax for he had an eye appointment, and his doctor was up there, and we were going up for his eye appointment at the same time that Ray Wagner's office. Ray Wagner is the Miller family lawyer. Ray's office had printed off the RCMP files for Maureen, and I happen to have the pleasure of being able to deliver those files in the physical form from the lawyer's office to the Millers in 2025. And at that point, it kind of changed. We quit working on what we have been working on previously, Maureen and I, about a report on search report. And at that point, I dug into the RCMP files, which at that time were, I think it was 17,000 pages. And what I did was to volunteer to the Millers, if they wanted to give me those 17,000 pages, that I could go through every page of it and pick out everything that was substantial and ignore all the rest, because there's all kinds of things that are insignificant, or they're in 13 copies of the same letter or email or whatever it may happen to be. I went through it all and picked out all the important stuff from that, and then started putting that together in the binders, basically under different headings. I've ended up with 7 binders through the years, and somewhere between, I'd say between 1,500 and 2,000 pages in those binders that are the most important stuff that I have been able to pull out of the files through my investigation time. And those binders have been recopied into multiple copies through the years and given to people who need to know that information or to have access to it. And it's become a reference source basically for me when I want to go find out something now that I've known through the years. But if it's not sharp in my mind because I haven't thought of it in a little while, I'll go to the red binder, which happens to be the one on the New Waterford Police, for instance. It talks about the New Waterford Police issues with what they had to say at the inquiry that took place, the fatality inquiry into Clayton's death, their testimony, when compared with each other or when compared with things that they've said in the past to the RCMP or in their own reports or whatever. When you have them all in front of you and you can compare everything, you can see how many problems there are. Anyway, the red binder, for instance, is the New Waterford Police. Now, there's 7 different binders, and when I'm looking for something in particular, if I want to remember exactly what someone said in their statement or their affidavit or whatever, then I go back to those and find it from there. So from that time back then until now, from April 2015, basically, or it was actually May, we recently realized that it was on the 25th anniversary of the day that Clayton's body was found, which was May 6th. He was found on May 6th, 1990. 25 years later to the day, it happened to be that I met Jervy in the parking lot at Staples in Sydney River, and he had been in there getting a copy printed off of the CERT report and the report from Dr. Bose that both came out at the same time about their alleged investigations in the Clayton's case. And both Jervy and I remember to this day him handing me those copies of those reports and saying, "Looks like you're one of us now." And I had no idea at that time how right he was going to be, because between then and now we've become very close. I'm very happy to say that I'm the Miller's biggest advocate or closest advocate, whatever, when it comes to stuff to do with Clayton's case, because I've had the time on my hands to invest in the study of that information. And I've done exactly that. In the beginning, when I first got those files, when the Millers first got those files and I got to bring them home to them, I had them on a disc, and Maureen and Jervy had them in actual physical form on paper. But I'd be up all night until late hours, and then like really late hours, and go to be asleep for 2 or 3 hours and get up and get right back at it again, because I had no idea what might be in there of significance, but I knew that the sooner I could find it, the sooner we could do something with it. So I was very, very adamant about getting into it and going through that paperwork as much as I could in the beginning, to find out everything that was in there that was significant. So that's why I can speak on what's in the evidence. When I talk about what's in the files, the RCMP files or the New Waterford Police files or the Nova Scotia Health Authority files or whatever it happens to be, I know that because I am the one, but at this point, who has spent the most time studying those files, just because I've had the time on my hands to be able to do it. there are times when Maureen actually calls me and ask me a question about something that's in the files, because there are certain things about this that I actually know more about than they do, because I end up spending more time on the examination of that particular part of this 33-year long story. So there are some situations where I've spent more time looking at some of this stuff than they have. So there are places at times and situations when they ask me questions about stuff, because I know I've come to the point where I know most of what they know, and they know almost all of what I know now too. So I'm in a good position to be able to speak on their behalf, as well as to inform people of what it actually is in the files, because the majority of what people hear uh, in the news from whatever source, or from the government sources such as CERT or the RCMP or the Nova Scotia Chief Medical Examiner or whoever, you never get the full story. And in most cases, what they tell you, there is little or nothing to support, which is one of the things that really bothers me about this whole situation with Clayton's case. What I've learned from being involved for this time that I have, is how they're expected to accept whatever someone tells them, with nothing of any concrete backing to support what they have to say. Just take our word for it and go from there. The CERT report was a prime example of it, but there are so many more about Clayton's case. It's um, when the cause of death which is a huge thing in this case, because it's changed so many times through the years. Since Dr. Butt came across the country in the end of 1993 to perform a re-autopsy, perform a procedure on Clayton's remains. From then, the official cause of death has been ruled as hypothermia. But 2 years prior to that, an RCMP officer who had investigated, allegedly, Clayton's case, had sent a letter to the doctor who performed the initial autopsy procedure on Clayton. His name was Dr. Ikajani. When Dr. Ikajani performed the initial autopsy procedure on Clayton, there were 4 New Waterford police officers present in the room. Despite the fact that at that time, in those years, there were 3 New Waterford cops on duty per shift. But for some reason, there's 4 at the autopsy of this boy, who at that particular time, the official story was they had thought he fell in the brook and drowned, because he was found in the brook with his face in the water, laying face down. So it was assumed that he had drowned. So if that's the case, it's a very strange thing that there are 4 New Waterford cops at this boy's autopsy when there are only 3 on duty per shift, and there are typically only 1 officer present for an autopsy. And I know that for a fact, because my father was a retired 40-year member of the RCMP, retired as a staff sergeant, and he was the number 2 man on Cape Breton Island for many years. And because I was taking care of Dad, and when I was studying this information and learning it for myself, as I would get information, I would bounce it off him right away, because he's a wonderful source to be able to do it with. So I went to him right away and I said, Dad, have you ever heard of more than 1 officer being present at an autopsy procedure? And he thought for a while, and he said, yeah, I think I can remember one time when that there was 2 for some reason, but I can't remember what it was. And he told that it's a nasty job to have. Nobody wants to be there to see a young fellow being dissected, which is basically what's happening at an autopsy. So
Right.
usually someone has to be ordered to go. It's not somewhere that you want to be, or anything along those lines. But for whatever reason, in this particular case, there were 4 New Waterford police officers at the autopsy of this 17-year-old boy, who they believe has fallen in the brook and drowned.
And that's really odd. I mean, there's no reason for like 1 person I could see, but like the autopsy person and whatever the officer in charge. But anything else after that's a little overkill, I would think.
It certainly would seem that way. It's also a fact that the doctor who's performing the autopsy is living in Canada in exile. He's from Nigeria, and he's had to leave his home country for political reasons, and would be killed if he returned to Nigeria.
Fuck.
He's the one that's doing the autopsy, and there's 4 no water for cops standing around him, and his autopsy report seems to be remarkably lacking in information.
Well,
It's
that was
very strange report, although we're not sure entirely how much of the report that we've actually been given a copy of may have parts held back, redacted, or whited out, or we're not quite sure what. There are strange aspects about Dr. Rikajani's original autopsy report, and the same with the medical exam. The original medical examiner's report has an area which appears to be describing injuries which can obviously be seen to have been whited out and had information reinserted where the previous information was whited out, because the actual line that the information had been typed on initially was whited out with the text that was whited out. And there is no notation of any kind near that to let anybody know who did this, made this correction, or at what time, which is what is generally done if by some chance an official document of that nature is allowed to be presented with corrections or whiteout areas like this on it. It's so inappropriate and unprofessional and highly unlikely that that's the original copy of it, because what appears to have been removed from the original version of it is description of what might have happened with Clayton's right hand or wrist or arm, which one of his wrists was known to have been broken based upon a statement by the ambulance driver who took Clayton's body to the hospital. When he arrived there, he mentioned the fact that one of his wrists was broken. The description in the rest of what's there on their medical examiner's report mentions the left arm, but makes no mention whatsoever of the right arm, and doesn't mention anything on the left arm about a broken wrist. So what appears to have been removed is the mention of the right arm and the broken wrist, and other text inserted in that same area, which is highly inappropriate. But one of the points that I wanted to get to is that the current chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia claims that he doesn't have and doesn't know the whereabouts of either the original autopsy report or the original medical examiner's report.
that's. And what was it there? Even his elbows, I believe, they were both dislocated.
Both elbows were dislocated. That's correct. When the re-autopsy was performed, and the X-rays were sent off for examination to a radiologist in Calgary, he noted that there was subluxation of both elbows, which means both elbows are dislocated. Now, neither Dr. Butt, who flew across the country from Calgary to perform the re-autopsy on Clayton's remains, he didn't mention anything about it in his report about the dislocated elbows. And there is a doctor, is from the United States. His name is Dr. Michael Bodden, who at the time was one of the top 2 or 3 in his field in the world. I was very familiar with Michael Bodden's name back in those days when he came here to perform that re-autopsy, he was an observer basically on behalf of the family. He had been hired by a private investigator that the Millers had hired. He was from New Jersey, this investigator, and he hired Dr. Bodden, who was actually from New York. And the investigator and Dr. Bodden were present when the re-autopsy took place, and Dr. Bodden is allegedly there on behalf of the Miller family. Now, when Dr. Butt, who is the doctor who's actually performing the re-autopsy on behalf of the Nova Scotia government, when he releases his report, he mentions that there are teeth missing from Clayton's skull, and doesn't mention anything about dislocated elbows. When Dr. Bodden, who is allegedly there on behalf of the family, releases his report, he makes no mention of missing teeth or no mention of dislocated elbows. And this is a doctor who's supposed to be there on behalf of the family.
Yeah, that's no mention of the teeth either. Like, Clayton had perfect teeth, according to his mother and everything, like the dentist records, everything. And the no mention of the teeth there, I mean, that should have been recorded. Like,
It's another part of how shabby and incomplete anything to do with investigation in Clayton's case is, because Dr. Butt has come across the country from Calgary to perform this, and he specifically says the part of the reason for the re-autopsy being performed is to better examine the skull for any injuries and this type of thing. What he actually writes in his report regarding Clayton's skull examination is that a close examination of the inside of the skull revealed no fractures, recent, or old, or recent. A few teeth were missing, with laxity of the teeth from the within the sockets. Unquestionably, a post-mortem condition, he says in brackets, unquestionably the reason. In other words, he's claiming that somehow between May of 1990 and December of 1993, Clayton's teeth have gotten to the point where they've gotten so lax, loose within the sockets from deterioration somehow, that they have fallen out. But he makes absolutely no mention of any kind at any time of finding those teeth within the casket. And if you are a scientist, or a doctor, or a man of science, and you're offering your opinion on something, you use whatever you have to support that opinion. In this particular case, he'd say, I know that they fell out of his teeth. It was laxity of the teeth within the sockets because they fell out and I found them within the skull. They were laying there. They had fallen out. There's the empty sockets. There's the teeth. Obviously, this is what happened. There is no mention whatsoever of finding the teeth within the skull at the autopsy. There's also no number given or location given of which teeth were missing or how many teeth were missing. And this is a re-autopsy being performed by a doctor who's supposed to be one of the best in the country in his field and has come across the country to do this procedure. He doesn't bother to mention how many teeth are missing or from where, but is detailed oriented enough that he tells how many eyelets there are in the deck shoes that Clayton's corpse was wearing when the casket was opened. Okay, obviously you're detail oriented enough to note how many eyelets are in his deck shoes. You might want to let us know how many teeth are missing and whether they're incisor, left incisors or right friggin' molars, or what they are, where they are within his mouth, because that's how professional autopsies are typically performed. You're not going to say a few teeth were missing and leave it at that, which is what he did. That's exactly what he did. An examination of the inside of the skull reveals no fractures, old or recent. He makes absolutely no mention whatsoever of any examination of the exterior of the skull. And I'm completely convinced Clayton's left eye socket, at the very least, was shattered. And you could safely get away with saying an examination of the interior of the skull showed no fractures and leave it at that. And if his eye socket was fractured, as I believe and we believe, then you wouldn't see that from an examination of the inside of the skull. You'd need to examine the exterior of the skull to see that. So if you don't mention any examination of the exterior, you don't have to mention any note of the fact that his eye socket was shattered, for instance. The other doctor, Dr. Bodden, who was there on behalf of the family, the way he got around it, the same thing, the exact same issue, the condition of the skull, what he said was there were no fractures, that he observed no post-mortem fractures of the skull or facial bones. Post-mortem means after death. Post-mortem fractures would have to have been fractures of Clayton's skull that took place after he died. Obviously, the fractures didn't take place after he died. The fractures took place before he died and might have led to his death, quite probably. But by adding the words post-mortem to his report, all he's saying is he didn't see any fractures that took place after he died. Okay, what about the other ones that might have taken place before he died? Did you see any of those that you might want to mention? No, that's not how they do it. It's mind-boggling at times. What some of these guys do, and it's down on paper. It's like, it's obvious to anybody who would take the time to examine that. Why is a doctor of his stature adding the words post-mortem to that statement that he makes. There are no post-mortem fractures of the skull or facial bones. Of course not. Nobody beat the dead body, the skull of a dead body, and to the point that it fractured something. But maybe somebody was kicking his head that fractured something before he died. What about that? Did you see any signs of pre-mortem fractures? But there is no mention of that. It's just, anyway. These are the kind of things that this case is so filled with.
Yeah.
They're everywhere when it comes to the actual details of Clayton's case, and
Well,
there are so many of them that are so significant that the average person who may be interested in Clayton's case or sees it pop up in the news from time to time and says, "What the hell's going on with that case? I wonder." Things that those people don't know. And one of the ones that I mentioned to you last time that people weren't able to hear because of our volume issues is regarding one of the members of the New Waterford Police Department. His name was Constable Wayne Crow. The day that Clayton's body was taken to the New Waterford Hospital, it was Sunday, May 6th, 1990, and the body arrived at the hospital at approximately 3 o'clock that afternoon. Between 3 and 3:30, inside the hospital, after Wayne Crow arrived, he mentioned to Clayton's aunt, she would be the sister of his father, Jervy Miller's sister. Wayne Crow mentioned to her between 3 and 3:30 that afternoon that this would never have happened if Clayton hadn't gone back for his hat. And what he means by that is that when they found Clayton's body, it was laying face down and his upper body was in the brook. His face was in the water, his shoulders were in the water, and his chest. His lower body and his legs were on the bank of the brook, and his knees were actually bent. His body was in rigor mortis, his knees were bent, and his feet were in the air because he was laying face down and the knees were bent. So his feet were actually the highest point of his body. Excuse me. His body was facing from his head was on the south side of the brook, and the feet were on the north side of the brook. And also on the south side of the brook, 7 meters south of the position of the body in the bushes, a hat was located, an orange hat with the Converse logo on the front of it. And a couple of branches were also located nearby that had been broken off on some bushes that were pointed in the direction of where the body was located, which would be pointing north, basically. So supposedly, police on the scene put these together and came up with the conclusion that Clayton must have been running down this hill through the woods, trying to evade the police, and dropped his hat and crossed the brook without his hat, and then decided to come back looking for his hat and fell into the brook and ended up laying face down in the brook long enough to eventually die of hypothermia, which is what they're suggesting to this day. That's what they concluded by the fact that they found this hat in the brook, or in the bushes rather, to the south, 7 meters to the south of where the body was located. Also, another important detail is that between the body and the hat, there was at least one or more footprints found in the slush that was remaining from the snow that had come overnight the previous night. And the footprint is not leading from the hat towards the body, it's from the body towards the hat. Now, my point about Wayne Crow at the hospital is this. Wayne Crow is at the hospital, and between 3 o'clock and 3:30, he's telling people there that this would never have happened if Clayton hadn't gone back for his hat. The real serious problem with that is that if you examine the actual evidence, which by the evidence in this case, I mean the hat itself, there is a tag on the hat, an evidence tag, which states that the hat was found at the scene at 3:45 p.m. on Sunday, May 6, 1990. So at least 15 to 20 minutes prior to the discovery of the hat at the scene, Constable Wayne Crow is at the hospital. He's already peddling the story that hat is the reason that Clayton is dead. But he can't know about the hat because the hat hasn't been found at the scene yet, according to the evidence tag, which says it was discovered at 3:45. But at 3:25 approximately, he's at the hospital telling people that the reason he's dead is because of this hat.
20 minutes prior. So he's going on with that.
How could that be? It's a very strange thing that he already knows before they found the hat that, oh yeah, that's why he's dead, because of that hat in the woods. And that story stands to this day, that that hat is the reason that Clayton is dead. Now, what all of your listeners would be unaware of, which is an extremely important detail, is the hat that they found in the woods is not the hat that Clayton was wearing when he left the house that night. The hat that Clayton was wearing when he went to the party that night was a fluorescent pink colored hat. And the hat that's in the woods that was actually found by the RCMP when they came and to photograph and videotape at the scene, they are the ones who found the hat allegedly at 3:45 p.m. Now, the really interesting part about this, when compared to Wayne Crowe being at the hospital and supposedly knowing the significance of the hat at 3:25, is when Wayne Crowe gave testimony at the fatality inquiry about Clayton's death, which took place later that year in the fall of 1990. When he was on the stand, he testified that he had been at the location to the west of the body, and where he was situated west of the body, and that he said, quote, literally he said, quote, "I was only there for seconds." Okay, he's only there for seconds, and he's to the west of the body. How could he possibly have seen a hat that's 7 meters to the south of the body in thick bushes? And here's the real kicker on this one: the investigator, detective sergeant, who arrived on the scene according to the RCA, New Orleans police records, their own notes, arrived on the scene at 2:20 p.m. Now, he is on the scene from 2:20 p.m. till sometime after 3:45 p.m. when the hat is found. And so he's been there for an hour and 25 minutes based on his own statement or his own records that he stated he was there arrived at the scene at 2:20. If he arrives at the scene at 2:20, he's been there for an hour and 25 minutes and hasn't found that hat yet. However, somehow Wayne Crowe, who claims literally his testimony was, "I was only there for seconds," says when he at the hospital at 3:25, he knows that Clayton is dead because of that hat. What hat? You shouldn't know about that hat because the hat hasn't been found yet.
Exactly.
Unless he dropped the hat there, how would he know that any of this had any significance, that Clayton's death had any significance to any hat? If the hat hadn't been found yet, and he was in a position where he couldn't have seen the hat because the detective who was there for an hour and a half almost didn't find the hat in the meantime while he's on the scene.
No.
And what kind of a friggin' detective is he if he hasn't found the hat in that time, considering there's a footprint between the body and the hat on the ground that's leading from the body to the hat?
Yeah, that was in the fresh slush. Like,
It was slush, yeah, because it had snowed overnight the night before. And as the day got warmer, the snow melted away to the point where by that point it was just a little bit of slush. Yeah.
even the facial like bruising and the cuts and everything, like for the kicks to the head there. We can discuss here about what happened with that too. I believe that we talked about Clayton was drinking, and he fell over into the girl or whatever, the other guy. Believe that was the girlfriend of another guy who he fell between, his hand went between her skirt, I believe. Now thinking, yeah, and then the other guy ended up getting mad about that, and then he got in a little bit of a scuffle.
That was his first encounter. That was Clayton's the first time he was assaulted that night. But that was not the main one. That in that encounter, he allegedly, based on the witness that told us she was personally there, she tried to pull the guy off him, excuse me, who was putting the boots to him, and she said he kicked him 2 or 3 times squarely in the head with a steel-toed boot.
Ugh.
And that Clayton was dazed to the point where he may have been temporarily unconscious.
Yeah, so temporarily, and then when somebody yelled cops or whatever, he got up and started hoofing her like to get away from them.
In the middle of that encounter is when someone hollered out cops. That this is not the main big raid. There was a big raid that took place sometime between 10 and 10:30 that night with a lot in the water for police. But this is not that one. This took place between 8:30 and 8:45 approximately. It was a smaller party that was taking place in a different location, approximately 400 meters away from the main party at the Nest that everybody is aware of later, that took place later on that night. By the time, it's my belief, based on my study of the files and the witness statements and whatever that I've had access to, that by the time of that big raid that took place at 10:15 to 10:25 approximately, Clayton at that time was in a cell at the New Waterford police station. I definitely do not believe that Clayton was still at the scene at that time, because he was picked up during the earlier raid, and with that, one of the main reasons that we officially know with proof that there was a raid earlier, because the New Waterford police have completely denied that there was more than one raid that night. They have never acknowledged the fact that this raid took place between 8:30 and 9 o'clock. But one of the guys that was with Clayton that night ran into the home of a complete stranger on Park Street near the area of the party, and ran into her home, soaking wet and full of mud, loaded drunk, and all out of breath, and told her the cops are chasing us. And she told him he had to leave, and he did. He was a stranger. She didn't know him. He didn't know her. Well, it turns out that he did know who she was, and that's why he went there. But she did not know who he was and told him to leave. A few minutes later, this woman's mother arrived at her home and was able to look after her young child. And as soon as her mother arrived, she checked to see about this young fellow who had just been in her house, to see if he was okay, and went out the door and took a look. Couldn't see him, but she did see a New Waterford police car drive up the street. And when she went back inside the house, she noted on the clock on the wall was directly in front of the door when she went back in. And at that time, it was 9:02. So it was somewhere at approximately 8:40 something to 8:50 something that Dale McKinnon was at her house saying that the cops are chasing us. So that's how we know that a raid took place at that time.
Right. And plus, there were reports from the police. I guess some people phoned in some reports of a party going on as well. That was around the same time.
That's one of those things, Chris, where if you pay attention to the details, you can see there's serious issues here, because there's a woman who, according to the New Waterford police complaints book, it says that she made a call to them at 9:35. Her name is in there, and that she filed this complaint, and that the time is 9:35 p.m. But if you have access to the RCMP files, as I do, you can see that she told the RCMP that she definitely made that call after 10 p.m. So when the New Waterford police are recording that in the book as 9:35 and using that as part of their inspiration for raiding the party, okay, we got this complaint that there's bad shit going on over there, we better go raid the party. That's not based on her complaint, because her complaint wasn't made until after 10 o'clock. So when they say that they got her complaint at 9:35 and have that recorded in their complaints logbook, that's completely false. And she told the RCMP on more than one occasion that she made that call. It was definitely after 10 o'clock, according to her, when she talked to the RCMP. So these are the kind of things that I talk about when I'm talking about inconsistencies and problems that are in the files that never make the news. That people never get to hear about these. There's so many. The fact that on Sunday morning, when Clayton's body was first discovered in the brook on Sunday morning, it was because, according to the RCMP timeline that's in the files, they say that at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, Gordy McKinnon, who is the brother of Dale is one of the boys who was with Clayton that night when he was drinking. He was Clayton's cousin and his good buddy. And Dale is the one who ran into the home of the stranger and said the cops are chasing us prior to 9 o'clock. On Sunday morning, according to the RCMP timeline, Gordy McKinnon told Dale to go down into the brook and look for Clayton, because he hasn't come home yet. It was the important thing, the detail that was written in the RCMP timeline. Because Clayton hasn't come home yet, he sends Dale down to the brook to look for him. Okay, the impossible part of that is that no one at the McKinnon home, where Gordy and Dale lived at that time with their mother and family, no one from the McKinnon household had spoken with anyone from the Miller household since supper time the previous evening. So it would be virtually impossible for Gordy McKinnon to know at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning that Clayton hasn't come home yet, or hasn't been in touch with his family, or they don't know where he is when he's sending Dale to go down to the brook and look for Clayton because he hasn't come home yet. Now, there's no way for him to know that he hasn't come home yet because from the Millers because they haven't been in contact. But it is conceivable that he might know that Clayton hasn't come home yet if he knows that Clayton is in the brook at that time, for instance. Or if he knows that something bad has happened to Clayton this weekend and Clayton's not going home because he's in no condition to go home and won't be going home again. For whatever reason, at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, Gordon McKinnon tells Dale to go down to check the brook for Clayton. And Dale goes down and finds Clayton in the brook at that point. The serious problem with that is we know that he found him in the brook between 9 and 9:30. By other means as well, by statements from other people. But the official version to this day is that Dale McKinnon and his buddy Billy Brushett, who was the third guy that was with Clayton, that the three of them together that night. The official story is the two of those guys went down to the brook at 1:30 in the afternoon and found Clayton sometime between 1:30 and 2. But in reality, he found Clayton in the brook between 9 and 9:30, or they found Clayton in the brook between 9 and 9:30. Whoever found him between 9 and 9:30 in the morning. Not between 1:30 and 2 in the afternoon, but that is the official story. And that is when, according to New Waterford Police, at 10 minutes to 2 Sunday afternoon, the mother of Dale McKinnon calls the New Waterford Police and reports that her son has found Clayton dead in the brook. The real problem with that, and then at that point, Mrs. McKinnon, gets someone to drive her to the Lingan power plant, which is where Clayton's father, Jervy, worked at that time, and tells him that Clayton is dead, and then accompanies him back to his home in New Waterford, where that's when Clayton's mother, Maureen, learns that Clayton is dead. The fact of the matter is the mother of Dale McKinnon and those in his household have known since 9:30 on Sunday morning that Clayton is dead. But they don't inform the Millers until 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, or later in the case of Maureen, when they drive from the power plant to their home in New Waterford. We also know there are these two friends that Maureen had, who are since deceased, told her that prior to 10:30 on Sunday morning, they were contacted by Dale McKinnon's mother, Mary McKinnon, and told that Dale had found Clayton's body dead in the brook. She called them and told them about this, but she didn't call Maureen or Jervy at that time and tell them that. Which is a very strange thing.
Oh, it's very strange. And even you'd think like the police would be the one to notify the Millers about that instead of Dale or the Dale's mother. You know what I mean?
Exactly. That's if everything was following proper procedure, that's how things would have gone. And they would have found out a lot earlier than 2 o'clock in the afternoon, because Clayton was found at 9:30 in the morning. That part of things is another one that, there are so many things in this particular case. When you hear all these details and you have the time to actually put them all together, because it's a puzzle to figure out what's true and what's not, and how does it fit together, and what can't possibly fit, because we already know this much of the picture over here, and now and again something will come in that's totally out of place and clearly doesn't fit with the overall. But part of what I've also observed from my studying of the files is how police dealt with those situations when that kind of thing happened, when they'd come across something that didn't fit with the official story. How the questions that they ask a question and they get an answer that they weren't expecting, the next question should be something that elaborate a little bit more on what you just told me, because that's interesting information, because it's contrary to what we've heard from other witnesses. So we want to hear what you have to say as well. But instead of that, the next question will be on a completely different subject and have nothing to do with the last question, because if they ask that question, then they're going to have to deal with the inconvenience of the answer that they get, which is not, that doesn't fit with our official story. And that is exactly a prime example, Chris, is when I read the RCMP files regarding Dale McKinnon going to the house of that woman on Park Street prior to 9 o'clock and saying that the cops are chasing us. At the bottom of the from the RCMP paperwork where they entered that particular information into their timeline, underneath that in large letters is written, this doesn't jive with everything else. Officially, this should be an hour later or something to that effect, which is exactly my point. Instead of going after that particular piece of information and elaborating on it to find out, to confirm what Dale is saying here, that there was actually a raid between 8:30 and 9 o'clock by New Waterford Police. Instead of that, they just push that aside and ignore that and move on. That went on over and over with the actual, what they call officially, investigation of this case. How could anybody not wonder how Gordy McKinnon would have possibly know to send Dale down to the brook at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning because Clayton hasn't come home? That's the part in quotations. If he hasn't been in touch with the Miller family, how does he know that Clayton hasn't come home at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning? That's, things like this should be followed up on, and the police are the people that you should be able to trust to follow up on them. Another part of all that thing with the Millers and the McKinnons is that in Dr. Bowe's report, he states that sometime on Sunday, Maureen was in touch, called Dale McKinnon on the phone and was talking to him, and that's why Dale went down to the brook, which is completely false because Maureen had no contact with Dale that day at all. And from that day forward, Dale had no contact with the Millers. He never sat down and told his version of what took place that weekend at all. He told it to the police in the beginning, his initial statement, and it took them no time to figure out that he was bullshitting them with what he was telling them. So they brought him in a few days later, and he gave another statement on video with his mother present. But Dale McKinnon, he's been questionable at best. His version of events and his lack of cooperation with the Miller family when it came to Clayton. He's I've heard from some people who know that his life these days is not good. He's had a lot of problems with the law. He lives out west somewhere, I believe. But as far as Maureen and ever contacting him on Sunday, that's completely false. Wherever Dr. Bowes got that to put in his report, we have no idea. But that's totally false. There was never any contact between Maureen and Dale that day. Before Dale went down looking for Clayton. Besides that, if he went looking for Clayton first thing in the morning, if he had gone at 1:30 in the afternoon, even if that was true, and maybe he did, maybe he didn't, but if he went down at 1:30, he knew what he was going to find because he was there a lot earlier in the morning than that, and found Clayton for the first time at 9:30 in the morning. But what's very disturbing is the fact that they waited for so many hours. What I started to say earlier about Maureen's friends, Mary McKinnon called those two women and told them prior to 10:30 on Sunday morning that Dale had found Clayton's body in the brook. She also called Maureen's house, called Maureen at 11 o'clock on Sunday morning. And when she called Maureen, she didn't tell her that her son Dale had found your son Clayton dead in the brook. What she said was, "Have you heard anything about Clayton yet?" And Maureen said, "No, I haven't heard anything about Clayton yet." And she said, "Okay," and she hung up. And after she hung up, Maureen told me, she said, "I thought it was a very strange thing for her to, why would she say, 'Have I heard anything about Clayton yet?' She should have said, 'Have you heard from Clayton yet?' or 'Did Clayton come home?' or whatever. But what she asked her was, 'Have you heard anything about Clayton yet?' Instead of telling her, 'Your son is dead.' This is at 11 o'clock in the morning. They still don't find out the truth that Clayton is dead for 3 more hours. When Mary McKinnon allegedly calls the New Waterford police at 1:50 in the afternoon to report that Dale has found Clayton in the brook.
And that's a little fishy. Like, it's all in the wording of it too. Like, you could have said, like, "Have you heard from Clayton yet?" or "Have you heard anything about Clayton?" Totally different subjects on that matter.
It's not. Have you heard from Clayton? That's what it would be. If it's one mother to another, and if she's worrying about Clayton like Maureen is, she's going to call her up and she says, "Have you heard from Clayton yet?" Or has Clayton come home? No, that's not what she asked. Have you heard anything about Clayton yet? It would appear that Mary McKinnon had expected that one of those other women that she had contacted earlier and told about it would pick up the phone and call Maureen and say, "I heard that Clayton is dead in the brook," or whatever. Because she obviously expected Maureen to have heard it from somewhere. And the only source that Maureen can get it from is either the people that Mary McKinnon has told it to, excuse me, or those people would tell it to. Because she didn't tell it herself directly to Maureen when she had the chance, or she had hours to call the Millers before 11 o'clock and after 11 o'clock, before she's allegedly called the New Waterford police. But that whole chain of events on Sunday, that's a very strange situation, what went on as far as the timing of Clayton's body being found in the brook and all of that. But one very likely and logical explanation for the delay between the time the body was found and the actual reporting of the finding of the body is the fact that early on Sunday morning, the ground was covered in snow. And Dale admitted as much on the stand at the fatality inquiry when he was asked about finding Clayton's body. He said when he found Clayton's body, I might be wrong about that. It might have been in a statement to police. Anyway, early on, Dale said when asked about finding Clayton's body, "Did you touch him?" He said no. He said, "How did you know that he was dead?" "Because he was laying there, he wasn't moving, and he was covered in snow." Okay, well, there was no snow on Clayton's body at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, or when the Millers arrived there about approximately 2:30 in the afternoon. There was no snow on Clayton's body at that time whatsoever. But in the morning there would have been, because it snowed overnight. And to those who would be on the scene early when the snow was still on the ground, the evidence would be very clear of what had taken place and how Clayton ended up in the brook. If what took place was, for instance, people in the area claimed to see multiple New Waterford police at a nearby town maintenance building. The town maintenance building, which was destroyed, removed, demolished shortly after Clayton's death, was 250 meters approximately from the location where the body was put in the brook, or was found in the brook. And there are people who live nearby who claim that they saw at approximately 4:50 in the morning, New Waterford police take what appeared to be a body from the town building and put it in the paddy wagon and drive from the town building over to the area of the brook where the body was later located. So if that took place while there was snow on the ground, anyone who comes along while there is still snow on the ground in the future hours will be able to clearly see that, okay, there's tire tracks that drove from there over to here. There's something happened here because there's a bunch of footprints leading from the tire tracks down to the body in the brook and back up to the tire tracks, and then the tire tracks drive away. Okay, if you arrive on the scene, you put two and two together, it's pretty clear what happened here. Somebody took a body from over there in that town building right there, at the other end of these tire tracks, and drove it from there over here, and then carried it from these tire tracks down to the brook and put it in the brook, and then walked back up to the tire tracks and drove away. So instead of having the reporting of the body early in the morning when the body was first located at 9:30, instead of that, there was a delay of the reporting of the body until the official version, the New Waterford police version, is that at 1:50 p.m., Mary McKinnon makes a call to the station and says that her son Dale has found Clayton's body in the brook.
How crazy is that, huh? Like, and that to me kind of feels like when they said that Dale found him around what was it 9:30, and then
that's what you get when you follow the RCMP. The RCMP timeline says that at 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, Gordon, they call him, that's Gordy, is Dale's brother, sent Dale to the brook because Clayton hasn't come home to go to the brook to find him. And it says that at 9:01, Dale left and went looking. Okay. The other important part is there is a next door neighbor who was interviewed by the RCMP many years later. And her partner at that time, when Dale came home from going to the brook and finding that Clayton was dead in the brook, he told his brother Brian, his older brother. And his older brother Brian and a guy who lived next door named Neil both ran down to the brook to confirm what Dale had said when he come home. And the RCMP came to the home of Neil and his partner Dorothy, and they interviewed Dorothy first. And the official, as I say, the official time of discovery of Clayton's body is between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday. When the RCMP interviewed this woman who lived next door 17 times during the interview, either the RCMP or that woman used morning, when referring to the discovery of the body. They never ever used the term afternoon. It was always morning. And at one stage of the game, the RCMP wanted to be more specific, and they asked her, when you tell us, they asked her, when was it that Neil and Brian ran down to the brook because they had heard about the discovery of the dead body? And she said, oh, it was in the morning. It was definitely in the morning. And they said, okay, well, the morning is a long period of time. Was it in the morning like breakfast time, or was it in the morning closer to lunchtime? And she said, oh, it was 9:30 is the quote is what she said. It was 9 to 9:30. And then she said, he can give you more details on that than I, because after they finished interviewing her, they were going to interview Neil himself, the guy that they had just asked her about as far as what time it was that he went down to the brook. So when they interviewed Neil, they asked him no questions about what time he went to the brook. And this is a prime example of what I'm talking about the way that they conduct their quote unquote investigations. Because if they were doing their job properly, when she told them that it was between 9 and 9:30 that Neil went to the brook, and the official story for years has been that he was discovered at between 1:30 and 2 o'clock in the afternoon, obviously we need to go a little deeper into this and get some details about this, because this doesn't quite add up. So the first thing they got to start asking Neil is, what time did you go down to the brook exactly? Because we've heard from your partner over here that it was first thing in the morning. Is that true? Was it between 9 and 9:30? But there was no such questions of any kind. They never asked him anything about going down to the brook as far as the time went.
And that's odd. Like, you think that would be just part of the very first fucking thing that they would do in the investigation format.
If you're investigating, that's what you would do. That's what you would do, Chris. That's what I would do if I wanted to find out answers about something. If the reason that I'm there, and that's the reason why they're there, because the significance of this guy is the fact that he ran down to the brook when Dale came back. He ran down to the brook with Dale's brother at that time. Okay, well, what time was that? When she tells them it was between 9 and 9:30, they decide to ask no more questions about that.
That's it. Just short and sweet about it, right? Like,
That's not investigating, that's for sure.
No. And even another part that I was thinking about there just now, like when they called Clayton's parents to get them over to the scene where they found Clayton's body.
No, they didn't. They never did call Clayton's parents. That's another thing that's been written down incorrectly. Police never contacted Clayton's parents. The contact with Clayton's parents came from Dale's mother, Mary. She got someone to drive her from her house out to the Lingam power plant, which is where Jervy worked at that time, and he was at work when this took place. She drove out there and went to the front gate, and it's a large major operation there. She went to the front gate contacts wherever Jervy is working. Gervais Miller come to the front gate. He comes to the front gate, and Mary McKinnon informed him then that Dale had found Clayton's dead body in the brook that morning. And then Jervy goes back, tells him, I have to leave. She waits while this takes place and follows Jervy home. And Jervy Maureen hears the key in the door at 2:16, I believe is what she's told me, on Sunday afternoon. She hears Jervy putting his key in the door. And when she hears that, she thinks, thank God Clayton is finally home, because only Clayton and Jervy would have the key, and she knows that Jervy is at work. So when she hears the key in the door, she thinks it's Clayton coming home. Instead, she looks out and she sees Jervy coming through the door. Mary McKinnon is right behind him, and Jervy is out of breath, and he's telling Maureen, is it true about Clayton being dead? And Maureen says, of course it's not. What the hell are you talking about? And she looks over Jervy's shoulder and she sees Mary McKinnon standing behind her, nodding her head. And that is how Maureen finds out that her son is dead.
Jesus Christ.
The police never called. Mary McKinnon never told Maureen when she talked to her at 11 o'clock or any other time she had known since early that morning. It's written down in the files, in the reports, and whatever. Some of these official, I put quotations around it, versions of events that the New Waterford police called the Millers at such and such a time or whatever. No, that is completely false. The New Waterford police never contacted the Millers. The first that the Millers saw of the New Waterford police was when they arrived near the scene. They arrived to an area called Wanda's Lane, which is approximately 425 meters away from where Clayton's body was found in the brook. And it was one of the ways that people used to use to get into this area of the park and the woods where the party took place that night. And in those days, there was very little vegetation because the area was a former coal mining area that had been transferred into a park later on. They called it Colliery Lands Park. And at that time, you could see clearly from the area where the parking area was at Wanda's Lane over to the area where there was a crowd of people standing on there's a high bank above the brook. It's about 20 feet in elevation above the brook. And there was a crowd of people standing there, so they knew that that's where Clayton was, basically. And it took them a few minutes to get from one area to the other. But when they arrived at the scene, Constable Wayne Crow, the same guy who later saw them at the hospital and told them about the hat, he was sitting in a police car in that parking area when they arrived there. And there were people who escorted the Millers to that area because they didn't know where the nest was, which is what they called the area where the party had taken place the night before. And that's where they heard that Clayton was, that his dead body was. So they flagged down people that they knew in traffic, and those people led them over to this area. And when the Millers got out of their car and started off towards where they saw the crowd of people, the police officer, Wayne Crow, said to the people who had led them there, "Who is that?" And they said, "That's the parents of the boy in the brook." At that point, Wayne Crow radioed the detective sergeant who was at the scene where the body was, 425 meters away approximately, called him on the radio and let him know that the parents were on their way. And supposedly at that point, Detective Sergeant Dwyer gets back to Wayne Crow and tells him to stop the parents, don't let them come over. Instead of doing anything along those lines, Wayne Crow makes absolutely no effort of any kind to stop the Millers. He doesn't speak to them. He doesn't get out of the car. He does nothing. Instead, he starts the car and drives away. And he later claims at the inquiry that he was driving away in order to call an ambulance to come to the scene to take the body away. Now, the problem with that is that Constable Chiquetto gave testimony at the inquiry that he was at the station at this particular time, and he had contacted the ambulance and told them to go to the brook in response to a call from Sergeant Dwyer at the scene. So obviously there was no need for Constable Crow to leave the scene, and so his claim was he drove from the scene to the New Waterford police station in order to call an ambulance. That's completely false because Chiquetto says he called the ambulance before that, and by the time Wayne Crow is arriving at the hospital, based on their own timing in their police reports, by the time he's arriving at the police station to call the ambulance, Chiquetto is leaving the station to escort the ambulance to the scene. So their own paperwork, their own reports and information don't line up with each other in a lot of ways. Wayne Crowe was driving away from the scene. Instead of stopping Maureen and Jervy from going over to the brook where Clayton is, and only one cop is on the scene, Sergeant Tom Dwyer. And what ends up happening is when Jervy arrives on the scene ahead of Maureen, um, he looks down and sees Clayton's mouth and nose is underwater, which is disputed by the official version of events to this day. They claim that somehow Clayton is laying in the brook with his head turned to one side, and no water has gotten in his mouth or lungs. Um, when Jervy gets to the scene and sees that, the first thing that he does is he runs right to Clayton's body and he pulls the body from the brook because he sees his son. As far as he knows, Clayton could be breathing if his mouth and nose are underwater. The fact of the matter is, Clayton was long dead before that, but it's an automatic response from a father when they see that with their son. My point is that there were no efforts made of any kind to prevent Jervy from getting to the scene, to go directly to where Clayton's body was, and to actually pulling his body out of the brook. After they did that, then the New Waterford police claimed that Jervy had disturbed the scene and whatever. Supposedly, they couldn't follow proper police procedures anymore because there was never any preparation or treatment of that particular area as a crime scene, or even the scene of a suspicious death or anything of that nature, because the first thing that should have happened when the New Waterford police arrived on the scene would be to tape it off. Nobody gets near the body. That's crime scene 101. Everybody knows that. And Wayne Crowe, instead of driving away from the scene, should have been there to help provide protection to the scene, to keep people from coming to the scene, like Jervy, like a distraught father is going to do when they see their sons laying in the brook with their face in the water. To me, the entire thing is a setup. The fact that the Millers were instructed by Mary McKinnon where Clayton's body was at the time that they were told that. They could have been told that many hours earlier, but no, they were told that at that particular time. The fact that Mary Miller is at the McKinnon's house, or that Mary McKinnon is at the Miller's house to volunteer to babysit for the Miller's other daughter at the time, so that they're able to go to the scene where Clayton is, so you can go there. Well, they shouldn't have gone there. They should have sent them to the hospital, or they should have sent them to the police station or whatever, not to the scene where the body is. And when they did send them to the scene where the body is, there should have been someone there to make sure that they don't actually get to the body. But instead of that, Jervy was allowed to go right directly to Clayton's body, literally in the brook, and pick him up and pull his face out of the water and hug him to his chest. And I've talked to witnesses who were there, and they said they will never, for the rest of their lives, forget the sound that came out of that man that day when he pulled his son out of the brook. And after he did that, this detective sergeant who was on the scene and who should have kept Jervy from getting to Clayton's body, instead, what he does, Jervy tells him that he's going to move the body so that Clayton's face isn't in the water anymore. So Jervy takes one shoulder and the cop takes the other, and they drag the body ahead for a foot or so to a spot where Clayton's face is no longer in the water. It's now on the dry side of the bank. They didn't just let him come there. They helped him to move the body without ever taking any pictures or making any sketches or any measurements or any kind of treatment of this scene as the scene of either a crime or even a suspicious death. There was none of that whatsoever. When Jervy arrived on the scene, down near Clayton's body was Tom Dwyer, the detective sergeant, and two guys, Brian and Neil, the two guys, Dale's brother and the next door neighbor, standing next to the cop, shooting the shit, smoking cigarettes, a couple of feet from the dead body that was laying there. That's how they treated the scene. Now, another important detail is the fact that, excuse me, within approximately 10 minutes of the Millers' arrival at the scene, Tom Dwyer had the body placed on a gurney and taken away in an ambulance to the hospital. There was no investigation of any kind that took place prior to the body being removed from the scene.
And how fucked is that? Like, that's
I agree completely. That is a very strange maneuver. And Tom Dwyer claimed that he did that because he had seen a large crowd of people gathering on top of the bank, and they're starting to get rowdy or something to that effect, which is completely false. The Millers and those who were there say those people at the top of the bank were silent. They were in awe, and they were in a state of shock, and they were practically silent. A large group of people were standing there, that is true. But the fact that they were in any way rowdy or getting, out of hand in any manner, that's completely false. That they would be any kind of an excuse to have the body removed to the hospital with no investigation or measurements or photos or anything of any kind is ludicrous. And it also needs to be known, your listeners need to understand that when Clayton's body was taken from the brook to the hospital that day, his mother and father accompanied the body. They were in the back of the ambulance with Clayton, and they insisted that Clayton's face not be covered up with a sheet. When the ambulance attendants put a sheet over Clayton's face, they said, no, don't do that. And they uncovered his face. And they studied the details of what Clayton's face revealed during that trip from the brook to the New Waterford Hospital. So they know exactly what Clayton looked like when he came out of the brook. And they also know what he looks like in the photographs that were taken of the body at the hospital later that day. They understand how different the pictures are from what they actually saw. Because the time that they dropped the body off at the hospital and the RCMP photographer took those pictures, Clayton's body, especially his face, was altered substantially. They said, the Millers have said, there's absolutely no question that they did a substantial bit of straightening out Clayton's nose again from the position that it was in when they found him, because his nose was flat against his face, and his upper lip was so swollen and split open that it was up basically touching his nose. And they were completely convinced at the time when the body arrived at the hospital that they were going to have a closed casket for Clayton's wake because of the condition that his face was in from all the damage that it had received somehow along the way.
Jesus fucking Christ. And because his nose was broken and his lip pushed right up. And I'm assuming those.
And teeth are missing. An important detail.
That's what I was gonna get to there. And like the perfect teeth, like his mom had dental records, like I previously said, and if they were kicked out from a fight or whatever, they wouldn't be perfect anymore. But I mean, like even the decomposition of the teeth when done by the autopsy results and shit, like that's in 3 months, like they couldn't fall out that fast. Like
not 3 months or 3 years, but they still wouldn't that fast. Tutankhamun still had his teeth when they found him thousands of years later. Yeah. But Clayton's perfect teeth fell out in 3 years, and by the way, they fell out, but we didn't find them, or we didn't mention finding them. All he said was teeth were missing. That's true. They're not only missing from his skull, they're missing from the casket if they fell out any time after he was put in the casket.
Like that's totally wild. Like,
yeah.
What was I gonna say here? Even the night in question, like when Clayton, even like before he went missing, all that. Some people say that he was arrested and he was thrown into the paddy wagon there, the cop vehicle, taken away to the jail. But there's no signing records of that happening there as well, if I believe correctly.
That's true. There's nothing official in the files that ever says Clayton was taken into custody. However, there is a police officer who still, I believe, to this day works for the Cape Breton Regional Police, who is not one of those who took part in dealing with Clayton's body, putting it in the brook, or any of what went on took place for that weekend as far as things with Clayton. This is someone who worked on the force at that time and who was on duty that night at some time. But this officer has allegedly told members of his family that he was working that night And the night when he left that night at the end of his shift, Clayton was in a cell and he was alive. Now, I don't believe that most of that night, until it was too late, I believe, the Waterford police weren't aware of the fact that Clayton was in as bad a condition as he was when he came into their custody. Because my belief, my understanding, what I have to go on is strictly the paperwork in the files and the few witnesses that I've actually been able to speak with or been present with when someone else is speaking with. But my belief is that Clayton died as the result of beatings by people other than the New Waterford police. My belief is that New Waterford police failed to get Clayton medical attention that was critical to his survival. He was kicked in the head initially multiple times, and then after that, he was assaulted brutally a second time by multiple people, and that assault also included many kicks to the head and the body. And it's my belief that when the New Waterford police found Clayton in an unconscious state, instead of calling an ambulance, is what they should have done right away. Instead of that, they did not evaluate the situation properly and determined that Clayton was in bad medical condition, as well as smelling of liquor. I have no doubt that Clayton smelled of liquor when the New Waterford police found him in an unconscious state, and could quite quickly have jumped to the conclusion that he was running away from us and he fell down face first and he's knocked himself out, and there he is unconscious and full of moonshine or liquor or whatever. And instead of realizing that he's in as bad a shape as he is because he's just been assaulted twice in a very short period of time, instead of realizing that and calling him an ambulance to take him to the hospital for medical attention, they called the paddy wagon. And they took him to the station and they threw him in a cell because they had bigger fish to fry, because in a little while from now, there's going to be a big raid taking place over there where the big party's taking place. And we have to go get ready for that now. So they just took Clayton, I believe, to the station and threw him in a cell. And it was after him being in the cell for some time and quite possibly not moving in all that time, that someone there realized that this young fella is in bad condition. And that person who came to that conclusion was probably the officer who we know was on desk duty that night, beginning the 10 o'clock shift while the raid took place. However, official records say that that particular officer never worked that night, and that Constable Wayne Crow, whose name I keep bringing up in this, that he was the desk sergeant that night on duty on the back shift, supposedly, despite the fact that a former sergeant on the New Waterford police force told the Millers in a recorded conversation that he had switched shifts with this other sergeant. His name was Brian White. And Brian White was scheduled to work that Friday night shift. Brian White was seen by relatives of his in a police vehicle in uniform at approximately 20 to 10, heading in the direction of the police station that night. And at least one of the people picked up at the raid and brought to the police station that night described the person that they gave their particulars to, their name and address and phone number, etc., as an older gentleman with gray hair and a bald spot. And there was only one officer that fit that, and that was Brian White. For whatever reason, the New Waterford police have denied forever that Brian White was on duty that night at any time, but there's substantial evidence to show that he was. Another important detail is that at that particular time in history, there was a substantial rift between the older members of the New Waterford police force, and multiple younger ones who had recently come from police school over in PEI from police college. These young guys were very quick to throw a chokehold on someone or immobilizing maneuver where you grab. There are a lot of places where you can grab a guy by the elbow, for instance. There's one, and press on a nerve that will immobilize that person. You'll have total control because of the pain you put them in by doing that. These guys were well aware of some of these particular holds and maneuvers, and were quite quick to practice them on young people whenever they had a chance to downtown in New Waterford on a Friday or Saturday night. There was a quite substantial rift between the older and the younger members. There's no question about that from what's available to be read in the files. And even to the point where the fall of that year that Clayton died in 1990, a group of the older members had approached the police union representative about early retirement, what would be involved in that kind of thing, because they didn't want to be basically tarred with the same brush as some of these young guys with the way that they had been behaving and treating young people as particulars with excess violent behavior, basically. There was a gentleman who was a former Sydney police officer. His name was Ed McNeil. He became an investigator for the Nova Scotia Police Commission, and he was investigating, I think it was 16 or 18 complaints against the New Waterford police in the year or so prior to Clayton's death, involving excess violent behavior during arrests or whatever, complaints against the New Waterford police specifically. And it was Mr. McNeil who was requested the video footage from the cells at the New Waterford police station, because they had cameras that covered the cells, so that when people were in there, their movements and actions were all video recorded. When Mr. McNeil requested the video from the night that Clayton died, from Friday, May 4th, 1990, the New Waterford police told him that for some reason the video recording equipment was not functioning properly that night, so they were unable to give him the video of that. However, the following night, I know from studying the New Waterford police complaints book that the following night, Saturday night at 10:30 p.m., when someone was picked up for intoxication, in the complaints logbook, they're noting the number, the tracking number before that, when they put the guy in the cell, the counter. So it's obviously working again by Saturday night miraculously, because they're recording the counter number on the recorder when they put this guy in the cell. So somehow between Friday night and Saturday night, if it wasn't working on Friday night as they claimed, they were quick to get it working again by Saturday night. So to me, it sounds like a bullshit story that it wasn't working on Friday night, but that's just my take on it all.
Well, there was like even that, like, to have it going from, hey, this isn't working, to, oh, hey, we fixed it like really quick and it's up and going on Saturday. Even Clayton's body was, when he was in the cell, it was kind of slumped over. A girl noticed that and mentioned that to the police on duty, and it seemed like nobody didn't give a fuck about that either.
That's true. What that's all about is that the night that they raided the party, officially, they claim to have taken 10 people into custody. And among those 10 people, there were 7 underage people and 3 that were adults. And according to those that were there that night in the police station after they were picked up, the young people were dealt with first, because their parents had to be contacted and whatever, they wanted them to get them home, because they're underage people. They wanted to deal with them and get them home as early as they could, basically. And this is happening after 10:30 on a Friday night, when they've conducted the raid and brought them back to the station. So what took place was they dealt with those 7 young youths, basically, before the 3 adults that they ended up charging and locking up. One of the people who was taken into custody and her friend were at the desk dealing with an officer who is known to have been Officer Paul Muse. And while they were discussing, answering questions, basically, Muse is getting their names, their address, their phone number, that kind of stuff, details. While that's taking place, next to him on the counter, there is a small black and white monitor on which is shown the video from the cells. And from what I gather, it would show a segment of time, 20 or 30 seconds maybe, in cell number 1, and then it will go flash to cell number 2 for the same length of time, and then cell number 3, and come back to cell number 1, cell number 2, cell number 3. Excuse me. While they were giving these particulars to the officer, and they noticed this, they noticed that there was an individual in cell number 1 who was laying on the cot that was in there, the bunk, the bed in there, in an unnatural position, one that would not be a comfortable position to be in, and appeared to be unconscious based on the fact that he wasn't moving at all. And at that point, she spoke up and she said, "Who is that in the cell and what's wrong with him?" and pointed to the monitor. And at that point, Palmuse reached over and turned off the monitor. He didn't tell them who it was or what was wrong with them or anything along those lines. Now, after the fact, when this particular point has been brought up, the fact that this individual was seen by this young girl, or these young girls, there was a pair of them, on that monitor, they have claimed that if they did see anything at all, what they saw was one of the 3 adults that had been picked up at the same time who had been put into a cell. The problem with that is they know very well, because they were there and those guys were still behind them, that though none of those people had been locked up at that time, it was impossible for that person that they had seen unconscious on a bunk in the cell to have been one of those other 3 people who was arrested at the same time, the adults, because they hadn't been dealt with yet. Those 3 adults were dealt with last. And another important detail is the fact that, despite the fact that New Waterford police deny having anybody else in a cell that night, except for these 3 individuals, when these 3 individuals were placed in a cell, they were not each individually put in a cell. It was not 1 in cell 1, 1 in cell 2, and 1 in cell 3. It was 1 in cell number 2 and 2 in cell number 3, or it was 2 in cell number 2 and 1 in cell number 3. But 2 of those individuals were placed in the same cell with each other. If there was nobody in cell number 1 that night, why would they not have been placed individually in a cell each? Is a good question for someone to ask and answer.
No, that's a beautiful question to ask. Like, it's everything. There's all, like, in this case, there's so many things that you read online. It's like, okay, is this going to be true? But like, you back fact everything and you go through it. It's like, well, this doesn't match up, and then this doesn't match up, and that's what's happening with this. Like, there's a lot more that I've gotten from you, and then I've learned that what's true online is total fucking bullshit.
I'll back that up. I'm gonna back that up. What's online is not necessarily true. That's
No,
more like you're saying what's true online. Okay, well, it's not true online. That's the problem. And the other part of it is, when you read things from sources that should be trustworthy. For instance, you should be able to trust the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia to do an examination of a suspicious death that took place some years back, and have him do a proper examination of that and tell the truth about what he found or didn't find, or what has been found through the years by others or hasn't been found by others. Instead of that, there's something entirely different than that chief medical examiner put out in this particular case. It's even more so, it's even worse, rather, in the case of the one that was put out by the Serious Incident Response Team. The contents of that report, all of the conclusions that are drawn, and almost everything that I'm not going to call him a gentleman, but that person who wrote that report, almost everything that's in there is completely false. And there is almost nothing presented in that report, which I believe is 52 to 57 pages approximately. There is nothing in there factual to support any of the claims that are made by that author of that report. And I just learned today in a conversation with Maureen Miller that the author of the CERT report back then, that former director of CERT, claims to have seriously considered filing charges against Maureen and Jervy Miller because of their insistence that there's been a cover up here.
Like, what the fuck? That's, yeah, but this family's been through enough with all this. You think throwing that at them is gonna?
Well, Maureen's words were to me when we discussed it, and she told me that she had just learned that recently. Her words were, "Bring it on," because there is nothing that we would like better than to be challenged in court by the Serious Incident Response Team regarding the content of their report. There is nothing that I would personally stand up for 2 or 3 days and point out the flaws in the report written by CERT. I actually did write my own version of a report on what I saw as problems in the CERT report. And I stopped my report at 60 pages when I realized that what I had written was longer than the CERT report itself. And I didn't cover all of the serious, I covered all of the serious problems, but I did not cover all of the inaccuracies contained within the CERT report in my report, which I stopped at 60 pages. That's how much faulty information is presented in that report by CERT. But it's done in such a way that very few people would have the ability, the knowledge to question what is presented in the report, because there are so few individuals actually named specifically as and identified in that report. When they say it's male number 3 or it's female 7 or whatever, no one in the public has a key to compare and say, okay, male number 7 is so and so McGruff. And we know what he actually said, so we can compare that to this and realize that what CERT's presenting here is inaccurate. There's nothing like that I'm aware of existing. So he can just go ahead and claim, this is female number 17 and say whatever he wants to say, quote. And no one in the public can challenge that because they don't know who he's talking about. If you don't know who he's talking about, you have no way to go out and check with that individual if they actually said that or not. So that report is presented in such a way that he can say whatever he wants to say and get away with it, except to someone like myself or Maureen or some of the very few people anywhere who know the details of this case well enough, to be able to A, identify who it is that he's referring to, and then B, point out the inaccuracies between what he's presenting in his report and what the actual files or statements or affidavits from that individual say. Because one of the things that the CERT report brings up and repeats over and over is the fact that it's impossible that Clayton Miller could have been beaten, but that any of this could be true about these people that beat Clayton, because everybody knows that Clayton's body didn't show any injuries, so there's no signs of injury. There was no beating. Okay, well, that's not true at all, because if you actually go through the files and take out what has been stated by medical professionals as far as the condition of Clayton's body and any potential injuries that were observed, there is a long list of at least 13 different things that include missing teeth and dislocated elbows and abrasions on his nose and his eyes and his cheeks and a bruise on his cheeks. And from one end of his body to the other, there are signs of injury. However, this guy, when he writes his report, keeps repeating the fact that nobody ever noted any signs of injury, and there is no way that any of this talk about him being beaten could be true, because if he did, there would be signs of injury. Oh, well, maybe missing teeth are signs of injury, and maybe dislocated elbows are signs of injury, etc., etc., etc. if you actually looked at reality instead of looking at whatever you're looking at or picking and choosing information from some individual who claimed to see nothing at some particular time and using that to base everything upon, then maybe you could say that. But reality is an entirely different thing. There is a long list of injuries that have been noted by medical professionals on the body of Clayton Miller. A broken wrist, according to the ambulance attendant that took his body to the hospital, for instance. Maybe a broken wrist is a sign of injury. To go through his report and look at the way he just dismisses things that don't fit his version of events, you can see how lacking in integrity, let's just say, his investigation is. One of the things that really got me about him was when he stated in his report that all evidence proves that Clayton Miller was never at the New Waterford police station on the night of May 4th, 1990. All evidence proves that. Okay, if he's stating that, then he is stating that there is evidence in existence which proves that. And the only evidence which could conceivably be in existence that would prove that would be 24-hour video surveillance tape of the premises, the New Waterford police station and the grounds. 24 hours that cover the entire period of May 4th, 1990. And you can look at that 24 hours of videotape and see the entire area and see that Clayton Miller has never been in that area in that 24-hour period. That would be one possible way, one possible piece of evidence that could conceivably prove what this guy is claiming. The other thing would be irrefutable proof that Clayton Miller is somewhere else for the entire 24-hour period. You've got video of him being somewhere for that entire 24-hour period, so he couldn't possibly have been at the New Waterford police station then. Unless you've got one or the other of those, you certainly don't have evidence that proves that Clayton Miller was never at the New Waterford police station on May 4th, 1990. Now, based on the fact that when Mr. Ed McNeil, who was investigating for the Nova Scotia Police Commission, asked to see the videotape for Friday night and was told that the videotape of the cells, the camera wasn't working that night. Okay, I guess then you can't possibly have 24-hour full cover video coverage to prove that Clayton was never there because the cameras weren't working that night. So do you have 24-hour proof complete proof that he was somewhere else for a 24-hour period of May 4th, 1990, and so he couldn't conceivably have been here? No. So it is total bullshit when he comes out in his report and states all evidence proves that Clayton Miller was never at the New Waterford police station on May 4th, 1990. That's total bullshit. And he knows that when he says that, but he is suggesting when he says all evidence proves that there is some evidence that proves that. And that they have that evidence, supposedly. Although if there was any such evidence, I have no doubt that at that particular moment he would say, and we know that because we have this evidence right here. The evidence is this. But he doesn't say this is the evidence that proves that. What he says instead is all evidence proves that Clayton Miller was never there. But he doesn't tell you what the evidence is. Like everything else in his report, he makes a statement but provides nothing of any kind to back it up. There is no foundation for any of the claims that he makes. Later on in the same report, he bumps it up a little more and he says, all evidence proves without doubt that Clayton Miller was never at the New Waterford police station on Friday, May 4th, 1990. And it's exactly the same argument. There, without doubt, all evidence proves without doubt. What evidence is there to prove without doubt that that took place? There is no such evidence, and he knows that. But the people who read the report don't take the time to consider these things. They read that and they say, well, holy shit, all the evidence shows he wasn't there, then he obviously wasn't there. They don't bother to think of, okay, what evidence could there be to prove that he wasn't there? And do they have that evidence? Obviously, in this particular instance, there is no evidence to prove that, and he knows that. And he knows it when he says it the first time, and he knows it when he says it the second time and says without doubt that there's no, all evidence proves without doubt that Clayton was never here. Okay, So when I read that, I knew the level of integrity that we're dealing with the author of this report. When he makes a statement like that and expects it to be accepted as factual, then he doesn't give a shit about the truth. It's obvious that what he's going to be telling us doesn't have to be true in order to be part of his report. And the more you read into it and the more details you actually know, the more you realize just how full of exactly that type of material that report is. There is no supportive material to concretely back up anything that he has to say. And there is lots of very contrary material to what he has to say. When you actually, excuse me, when you actually read the files and know the details of what are in the files and have that to compare to what this guy is saying in his report, you realize that it's bullshit from end to end. It's not worth the paper that it's written on. Right? When I gave it to my father to take a look at back in the day, he read about 3 pages of it. And I came back a little while later and I said, "Did you read that report, Dad?" He said, "I read the first 2 or 3 pages." And I said, "What about the rest of it?" He said, "The rest of it's not going to get any better." He said, I could see in the first couple of pages what this guy is. And he didn't bother to read the rest of it because he could tell right off the bat, this is not, my father knew how to write reports. He was an RCMP member for 40 years and he worked his way up to a very high position. And he was as trained as could be on as many different subjects as could be. The RCMP had high hopes for my father to go on to a career after he retired from his career as an active member. They wanted him to become what do they call it, a commissioned officer of some sort. But he had no desire for that. But the reason, because they wanted that, and they saw his abilities and his integrity and his characteristics, from the time he was very early in the RCMP, he was sent off on as many different training courses as could possibly be. And as a result, he had absolutely no question about how proper investigative reports are supposed to be written. And when he saw this report, he was very, very shortly into it before he decided that this guy is not professional and it's not professionally done, and he wasn't going to waste his time reading it, basically.
No, he doesn't seem too interested in like helping anything, like solve anything on that. It's like, here you go, this is what happened, and it's complete bullshit.
Something that I brought up to you when we spoke the last time, Chris, and I got a little distracted on it. It was about this guy, Ron McDonald was his name. The guy who was in charge of CERT at that time, the director, and who wrote this report. In April of 2017, he signed a 5-year contract extension to remain with CERT in Nova Scotia. A little later in that year, July of that 2017, it was in 2015 that he released his report into Clayton's case and said that there's nothing to see here, basically the same old blah, blah, blah. 2017, he signed an extension to stay with CERT for 5 more years in April. In July of that year, Miller family lawyer Ray Wagner put on a press conference during which he presented snippets of video from an interview conducted by himself and myself of a former member of the Cape Breton Search and Rescue named Brian McDonald, who gave us a detailed 1-hour interview about the search that he coordinated, which took place on Saturday, May 5th, 1990, and which consisted of a search specifically of a brook that ran through an area of New Waterford where a party had taken place the night before. And that brook and the brook only was the area of the search. Now, this individual, Brian McDonald, told us about the fact that 12 to 15 people searched that brook on Saturday, May 5th. They went from one end to the other. They were on both sides of the brook. They were 1 arm's length apart, the individual searchers were, and they searched all the way up the brook and all the way down the brook. And there was no body in the brook on Saturday, May 5th, 1990. However, Clayton's body was found in that brook the next morning at approximately 9:30 a.m. And the official story to this day from the Waterford Police, RCMP, CERT, etc., is that Clayton's body was in the brook from Friday night until Sunday morning. Now, obviously, if his body was there on Saturday, when 12 to 15 people are searching that brook and only that brook specifically, they're going to find him if he's there. Because at that time, the brook itself was very small. The brook was not as wide as Clayton was tall, and Clayton was 5'7" or something, I think. There was very little water in the brook. The brook itself was narrow, like I say. It was the first week in May, so the leaves weren't out on the trees yet. Brian McDonald gave us a detailed description of the weather, the conditions, the area where they searched. Prior to our interview with him, I had ordered aerial photographs from the institute in Amherst where they deal with this such, and got aerial photos of the area sent to me. Then I had those aerial photos cropped to the area that contained the brook, and had them enlarged to substantial blow-ups, and also came with a red marker. And we had Mr. McDonald, Brian McDonald, show us and draw for us on the aerial photos rather, with a red marker, exactly where the search had taken place that day. All the way, he showed us all the way up the brook, all the way to the top, all the way back down to the bottom. And there is absolutely no question that the area that he showed us that day on those aerial photos included the area where Clayton's body was found the following morning. There is no doubt whatsoever in his mind that on Saturday afternoon, when they conducted that search from 4:30 to 7 o'clock or sometime in the evening, that there was no body in the brook on Saturday. He's absolutely certain of that. The interesting part about this is that search was actually done at the direction of the chief of the New Waterford Police. Now,
Okay.
people would ask, if the New Waterford Police are the ones that are responsible for Clayton's death, or are have his body at the time, or whatever, or if they're the ones that are going to throw him in the brook, why would they call them out to search the brook of all places?
Well, yeah, that's
My answer to that is because up until that point, the chief of the New Waterford Police, who is the one who allegedly, based from Brian McDonald's recollection, he's the one who called the search. On Saturday afternoon, when he asked for this search to take place, he would have no idea that some of the members of his force have done a bad thing the previous night, and we've got a dead body that we've been hiding out since sometime last night. They're not going to mention that to the chief right away, because if they can drop this body in the brook and get away with our story of what took place here, there'll be no need to let him know the details, which is that it's our fault that kid is dead because we didn't get him to the hospital like we should have last night or the night before, or well, it would be that last night if it's on Saturday. So, excuse me. Friday night when Clayton doesn't come home is the first time that the Millers contacted the Waterford Police Station. Jervy calls them at approximately 10 or a quarter after 1 when Clayton doesn't come home. And Maureen called around and heard that there was a party that got raided at the Nest that night, so maybe he got picked up by the police. So Jervy calls the police station and checks to see if Clayton is one of the ones that was arrested. And they go through a list of names and say, no, his name is not on this list. Okay, thank you very much. Next morning, Maureen calls them at approximately 9:30 on Saturday morning and said, my husband called last night. We're just wondering if you might have come across Clayton in the meantime, or no, nothing. Okay. Then Maureen goes selling Girl Guide cookies with her daughter that morning. And when they get back at approximately 11:30 that morning, she calls the station for a third time and says, I was talking to you earlier, just checking to see if maybe you've heard anything about my son or whatever. And there's nothing. So by 11:30 on Saturday morning, there has been 3 calls from the same family about the fact that their son didn't come home last night. And I believe that a deputy chief who was on duty that morning, quite possibly after the third phone call from Maureen, he may have picked up the phone then and called the chief and said, "Hey, chief, I don't know if there's anything to this or not, but there's a woman there's a family who's called 3 times about their son hasn't come home last night. Maybe he was at the party that got raided, and maybe he's injured in the woods, or maybe whatever." So I believe that at that point, the chief did the right thing. And that's when the chief of the New Waterford Police called the head of the Cape Breton Search and Rescue, Mr. Langley, and had him come over for a meeting to discuss how Cape Breton Search and Rescue conduct their searches, because at that time, Cape Breton Search and Rescue and New Waterford Police had not done work together. So they went over and had a meeting with the chief of police and a couple of other members of the force, and explained how it was that they conducted their searches and this type of thing. And later on, after they had returned home, Mr. McDonald and Mr. Langley, Mr. Langley received a call again from the chief, in which case he's asking them to conduct a search specifically of the brook that runs through the area where the party was the night before. And I believe that is because, A, the chief doesn't know that his members are responsible for Clayton's death at least through negligence, if nothing else, because they didn't get him medical attention. They don't know that Clayton died and that they have his body stashed somewhere at that time, which is why the chief of police does the right thing and calls out Cape Breton Search and Rescue to check the area of the brook to make sure that Clayton didn't fall in the brook last night, which is exactly what they do. Now, of all places on earth to put Clayton's body, the next morning, those other members of the force who didn't tell the chief about what took place on Friday night, they don't know about the search that took place on Saturday afternoon either. So instead of dropping Clayton's body anywhere else in the world, they drop him in the one place that you can't drop him. Because the place that they choose to pick him, to put him, is the place that was searched the previous day by Cape Breton Search and Rescue professional search people. And a search that was called out by the chief of their own force, because he didn't know that they're holding a dead body and they're going to try and get away with pulling off this bullshit story that they do when they drop the body in the brook and claim that it's because he was going back for his hat, which is back to what I told you about Wayne Crowe at the hospital. It's obvious that this is the story that they've created, that he dropped his hat, he decided he's going to go back, and in the meantime he falls in the brook and he ends up dead. The real big problem is that's not Clayton's hat, first of all. That's over there, that's on the other side of the brook, and we know that because he was not wearing an orange hat. He never had an orange hat with a Converse logo on it. The hat that he was wearing that night was a fluorescent pink colored hat that he had picked up a week or two previously with his mother when they were in shopping in Sydney, and he saw it out in front of a store on a clearance table for $1.50. Now, in 1990, nobody's buying a Converse hat with a logo on the front for $1.50. But that's what the hat that Clayton was wearing that night was, a pink colored fluorescent hat that he bought on the clearance table for $1.50. The hat that the New Waterford Police provided as the one they found in the woods, that we still have to this day in an evidence bag, that was found at 3:45 p.m. on Sunday, May 6, 1990, is an orange Converse hat, not the hat that Clayton was wearing. Somewhere along the lines, either the New Waterford Police decided to create this story about the hat and dropped it in the woods and near the body, dropped the body in the brook, dropped the hat in the woods, said that he was going back for the hat. They've either created that story at that time, and then Wayne Crowe is telling that story at the hospital when it's too soon, because like I told you before, he's telling that story before 3:30, and the evidence tag says that the hat was found at 3:45. They haven't found the hat yet, but he's telling the story saying that Clayton died because he's going back for that hat. Well, the hat that you're claiming that he was going back for is not the hat that he was wearing that night. So why would he be going back for that hat? Another important detail is, if they were scared enough of police to run where they claim that they ran, down a very extremely steep bank, which was wooded, and down into woods below, before they got to the brook, on a night in an area that would be so dark that literally Clayton would not be able to see the hand at the end of his friggin' arm. He wouldn't be able to see his feet if he looked down because he wouldn't be able to see the ground. He certainly would not be able to see a hat if he had dropped it somewhere in that blackness that would be down there in that particular patch of woods that night. It would be absolutely impossible for Clayton to have gone back looking for that hat without having a flashlight, and he definitely did not have a flashlight. Those boys had no flashlights that night. And the Waterford police testified at the inquiry about how difficult it was for them to walk in along that brook that evening when they were coming in to raid the party. Two of them came in along that brook with flashlights, and they specifically spoke of how difficult the traveling was for them with large police flashlights. They're claiming that Dale and Clayton ran down this particular, there was a path, a slight path. The path was actually hard for me to pick out when I saw the police video from the top of the bank looking down. But I know that there is a path through there. There was a path through there. But it would be absolutely impossible for those lads to have followed a path or to have found a path that night at that time because of the darkness situation at 10:30 on that Friday night. They were far enough away from any street lights or any other sources of light. On a night with it was not a full moon, it was not a bright sky or any of that type of thing. It would be literally impossible for Clayton to have seen his feet. So there's no way that he's going back looking for a hat that cost him $1.50 a week or two prior. And if he's scared enough to run down where they said that they ran in order to evade police, it would take more than $1.50 hat falling off his head to get him to turn around and go back towards what he would have expected at that time would be pursuing police. If he thinks cops are chasing him through the woods down there where he's running, he's certainly not going to turn around and go back because he thinks he lost his hat and he wants to go back and find it. The other extremely important detail, and it is extremely important about all of this, is the area where they found the hat down near the brook on the low air, below the high bank, is approximately 400 to 450 meters away from the area where a witness claimed to have heard Clayton hollering about losing his hat when they were running away from their police raid. It wasn't the raid at 10:30. It was the raid at approximately 8:40 to 8:45 in that range. This witness says that as they're running away, Clayton says something about losing his hat. Okay. When you piece together the pieces of the puzzle and the timeline, you realize that this person who was saying that she heard Clayton say this is running away from the police at the same time that Clayton has just been kicked in the head 2 or 3 times during the first assault. And after that assault, the guy who's kicking Clayton runs away. A few seconds later, Clayton regains his consciousness and jumps up and starts running away. And this witness says that while they're running away in this particular area near the power transformers and the racetrack, which we can certainly identify, it's a very identifiable location, and it's not where the body was found. That is where she hears Clayton hollering about, "I've lost my hat," or something to the effect of, "He's lost his hat. I can't find my hat." Now that makes perfect sense because only a minute or minutes earlier, excuse me, Clayton is getting kicked in the head multiple times. Obviously, if you're being kicked in the head and you've got a cap on your head, there's a pretty good chance that when you get to your feet, your hat is no longer on your head. And that's what happened in this particular case. And this witness who's running away says Clayton was behind us and he was hollering about losing his hat. Okay, that makes perfect sense because he just got kicked in the time. Where he's complaining about losing his hat is near the racetrack and the power transformers and Wanda's Lane, which is well over 400 meters away from the area where Clayton's hat was located on the ground. Or no, where a hat was located on the ground, 7 meters south of the body. The orange hat that was located there is not the hat that Clayton had on his head when he got the kicks in the head, and is not in the same location as where he got the kicks in the head because it's over 400 meters away from there. So to try and tie the two of them together is totally ludicrous. They have nothing to do with each other because where Clayton was running away from the police was over 400 meters away from the spot where his body was found. And the hat that the police found and took into evidence was found 7 meters south of that body. So they can't tie the two of them together because one has nothing to do with the other. They're totally different locations.
Yeah, that's a little fucked up. Like even the what was it there? There was some residue on his hands too when they was it when they found him, or was this after? I believe after he was taken away to the hospital there. He had like coal-like material on his hands too.
Well,
If I remember,
if you listen to the official version, it's coal-like material. And the reason that they said coal-like material is because the area where the body was found is actually an area that was at one time a coal mining area. And a lot of the material in the area, right in the area where Clayton's body was found, is leftover residual materials from the coal mining process that they've dumped around the area and basically converted into a park over time. Um, the problem is that coal type material, which is easily available. If you go around there and take a look down where you're walking, that's what you're walking on when you're in that area. And I've been there many times. And many times when I've been there, I've reached down and I've grabbed a handful of that material. That it actually is small flakes of coal, not flakes, small, whatever you want to call it, small material. Picked it up and I hold it in my hand to try and see how hot and warm and sticky I might be able to get it. Excuse me. To see if it would get to the point where when I open my hand and turn it upside down, it sticks to my hand. Because what you have in the case of Clayton's body is dark black, fairly large flecks of material that are stuck to his skin beneath his clothing. And it's large. There's a lot of it on his face. There's a lot of it on the area of his throat. It's on his chest. But as well as these places that the official version claims that what is stuck to him in those places is leftover coal bits and whatever that's in the brook and in the area. Okay. Now, the problem with that, like I said before, is there is nothing that I can do with heat and friction and pressure that I can't get that stuff that's there. I can't get it to stick to my body. And my body is at 98.6 degrees temperature. Clayton's body is a cold body when they're taking it out of the brook. And this dark black material, which is stuck to Clayton's skin, is not just stuck to positions on his body that could have been exposed to that material on the ground near the brook, which would be theoretically his face, his neck, his hands. The rest of his body is covered. He's got pants on. He's got jeans on. He's got a t-shirt and a sweatshirt on his body, and his body is laying on the ground. Okay, if in actuality what is stuck to Clayton was stuff from the immediate area, then you could accept that if the areas that it was stuck to were just the skin on his face or his neck or his hands, the skin that would be exposed in order to make contact with that material and somehow get it to stick to his hands. The problem is when you view the photographs that were taken at the hospital that day by the RCMP, after they stripped the body, they took pictures of the clothed body and the stripped body. And a very important detail is that Clayton's arms, both arms, and his head appear in multiple different positions in the photographs taken at the hospital. So for some reason, while they're taking pictures of the body, they've moved the head to different positions and they moved his arms to different positions. Now, My understanding is that in a case like that, they would cut the clothing off the body. So the removal of the clothing should be no explanation for why his arms are in different positions in different pictures that they took at the hospital that day, or why his head should be looking straight ahead instead of to one side or the other. The Millers know which way Clayton's head was facing, to the right, to his right. But in all the pictures, his head is either facing to the left or facing forward. They also know that the position of his right arm was basically perpendicular to the body. It was like if you were making your arm into a wing. When I first met Maureen and Jervy said, "Can I put you in a chokehold?" And I said, "Well, I guess so." He said, "I just want to show you the position that Clayton's body was in when I found him." So he put me in a chokehold. He put his left arm around my throat, and he had my left arm behind my back in a hammerlock. And he said, "Now, if I was to start to tighten up my hold around your neck," he said, "what would you do?" And I reached up with my right hand and tried to get in between his arm and my throat so that I could pull it away enough to make room for myself to be able to breathe. And he said, "Now hold your arm right there in that position," which is basically if I've got my elbow pointing away from my body. He said, "That's the position that Clayton was in when we found him." So his right arm is basically at the level of his shoulder with his elbow pointing away. And there are no photographs of the body at the hospital with his right arm close to that position. So we know that for whatever reason, while they were taking the pictures at the hospital that day, they were changing the position of Clayton's body. The same as they cleaned him up before they took the pictures. They fixed his nose, like I said earlier, and the split in his lip, and they did a lot of things to make him appear a lot less abused or beaten and whatever than what the Millers saw. And people to this day say, "Well, you people, you're just think that that's what you saw. You saw him at the brook, and you were like." Dr. Bose basically belittles Jervy when Jervy gives his opinion of what he saw when he arrived at the brook that day. Dr. Bose, in his report, says something along the lines of, Mr. Miller's intention that day was not to make detailed notes of the position of make notes of the position of his son's mouth and nose with regards to the water level or something to that effect. Well, that's true. It's absolutely true that Jervy didn't go there with the intention of making detailed notes of the position of Clayton's mouth and nose in the water. But I can guarantee you that for the rest of Jervy's life, he will never be able to eliminate that image of exactly what he saw. And what he saw was Clayton's mouth and nose underwater, which is why the first thing he did was run right to him and pull his face out of the water. Dr. Bose basically says that Jervy didn't go there with the intention of making detailed notes, blah, 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 blah. That's absolutely true. But it's also true that for the rest of his life, he will live with that image, and he knows exactly what he saw. Exactly the same way as they know precisely what they saw when they traveled in the ambulance with Clayton's body to the hospital in order to know how badly Clayton's nose was broken and how flat it was against his face and how swollen his upper lip was and how split open that lip was and everything else about him. To get back to the point about the black material, Chris, when you look at those photos in the taken at the hospital that day of Clayton's naked body, that black material is all over his body. It is stuck to his belly. It is stuck to his back. It is stuck to the cheeks of his buttocks. It is on the back of his legs. Now, at this point, when these pictures have been taken, his clothing have been removed from his body. And this material is so adhered to his body that the process of taking his clothing off hasn't removed that material from his body. It's still stuck to his skin after they peeled his clothing off. Now, there is no way ever that anybody would ever convince me that what stuck to Clayton's body is that coal-like material that is found in the area where his body was found. Because I can't get that stuff to stick to any of that stuff to stick to my hand in any fashion when I hold it in my hand for 20 minutes and squeeze it tight. I don't know what the temperature in there is at that point, but it's well over 98 degrees. I know that. And I also know that it's a lot warmer than Clayton's body was when it was in the brook. So the fact that that stuff won't stick to my hand, it would not still have stuck to Clayton's body either. What stuck to Clayton's body is something definitely different than the material in the area where his body was located. But if his body had been located in the town maintenance building, which residents of the area claimed to have seen the Waterford police removing what appeared to be a body from that morning, if Clayton's body had been in there, in that building, which is a building which would hold such materials as asphalt patch material, cold patch, as some people call it, if Clayton's body was in there, and if by any chance Clayton's body happened to have been stripped to make contact with that material, then that petroleum-like material is something that would be much more likely to stick to a human body than coal.
Well,
And
it seems that the coal didn't stick to your hands, and the temperature of Clayton's body then, like, it only makes it feasible that he was dumped in another place for some meaning of time, like a garage, for instance, and that would have that material in there, like you said, right? And
it wasn't exactly a scientific experiment by any means. What I'm doing when I go there and grab a handful of that stuff, I mean, this is not a scientific experiment, or but on a controlled situation or environment or whatever, and that kind of stuff. But it is obvious to me that this stuff, when I pick up a handful of that coal dust and whatever, not just dust, it's little chunks of it, cubes, that doesn't stick. That material does not stick. But if Clayton was in that building over there, where the coal patch asphalt is stored, an important detail that people don't know about this case is that when Jervy went to collect Clayton's clothing from the New Waterford police, which they had preserved in evidence bags, he took the clothing, and it was still in plastic bags at that point when they gave it back to him. And Jervy had prepared, before he went there, a form which stated that while Clayton's clothing were held in their possession, the New Waterford police had done nothing to alter the clothing. They hadn't cleaned them. They hadn't put them in chemicals. They hadn't done anything with them of any kind. And Jervy brought that when he went there, and the chief of police, Doug Crow, refused to sign that. And what was taking place at the time, it was all recorded by Jervy. He had a recorder in his pocket and recorded the conversation, as he did with many conversations at that time. Excuse me. Doug Crow refused to sign that paper, and when he was while refusing to sign the paper, he said to Jervy, "I'm not signing it because I don't know what the RCMP might have done when they had the clothing. For all I know, they could have put them in chemicals, or I don't know what they did with them. So I can't sign that." Okay, the problem with that is the RCMP never had possession of those clothes. Only the New Waterford police had ever had possession of the clothing, not the RCMP. Now, when Jervy took the clothes from the New Waterford police, he took the plastic bags with Clayton's clothing in them and put them directly into brand new paint cans. And he had the paint cans hammered shut and the lids taped over on them to preserve that evidence as evidence. And sometime later, when they had the private investigator from New Jersey working for them, Jervy himself physically took those paint cans with the clothing down to the U.S. to have them examined forensically. And when he took them to the lab where they were going to examine them, he was warned by the person who worked there, this is not going to smell good, because they were expecting bloody clothing that's going to be coming out, and it's not going to be a pleasant smell by any means. And when she opened the plastic bags with the clothing in them, she immediately said, this clothing has been dry cleaned. There was no question from the smell of the chemicals that the clothing had been put in that Clayton's clothes were dry cleaned before they were given to the Millers. Now, another little detail about this is those clothes, which had been dry cleaned previously, also had some of this black sticky material on the clothing. What that shows to me is that the clothing were not dry cleaned after Clayton's body was taken to the hospital and the clothing was stripped from the body. Because if that was the case, the clothes would have came back with none of that black material attached to it. They would have came back completely cleaned from the dry cleaners, been put in a plastic bag, then been given to Jervy, then been taken to the lab in the States. So there would be no black material attached to those clothing because the clothing would have been dry cleaned after the time of contact with that black material. My sincere belief is that Clayton's body was taken to the town's maintenance building, and in that building, he was stripped of his clothing. The clothing were taken somewhere and dry cleaned, brought back, and put on Clayton's body. While Clayton was naked, while his clothing had been stripped, the body came in contact with cold patch asphalt material. Wherever they laid him, this stuff was on the floor, or they put him in somewhere that it was nearby, and some of that material made contact with Clayton's body and stuck to it. Then when the New Waterford police arrived back at the town maintenance building early on Sunday morning, between 4:30 and 5 o'clock, it's still dark at that time, and they are dressing Clayton in the recently dry cleaned clothing. What they did not realize at that time was that this black material was stuck to the body and that they're putting the clothes on over that material. Only if something like that took place can we explain how it is that when Clayton's body is taken to the hospital and the clothing is taken off of his body, that black material is still stuck to Clayton's body, including his buttocks. There's no way that if Clayton's body is found laying face down in a brook, that there's a logical explanation for black material being under his jeans and his underwear and stuck to the cheeks of his ass. They're not going to claim that that is just the material from the area, the coal mining material that's left and dumped in the area where the body was found, because the body was found laying face down. And it was not turned over on its back at the scene and then taken to the hospital. The body was picked up in the position in which it was found, laying face down, knees bent, feet in the air, put on a gurney, taken to the hospital in that position. So there's no explanation that the body was rolled over at the scene. Some of that black material that's at the scene somehow made it through his jeans and his underwear to get stuck to the bare skin of his ass. But that's where it is. And you can look at the photos of his body at the hospital and see that stuff still adhered to his skin after his clothing has been removed.
That's kind of wild. Like, and you know that it. Like, I'm just trying to think here. Like, I know that material didn't match up with the other stuff, but that makes perfect sense of, garage-like material, right? Like substances that would actually stick to your body, residue-wise, whatever.
The other thing about the dry cleaning aspect of it all is they're trying to present the notion that Clayton just fell in the brook and ended up dead. Okay, if that is true, then if there's blood on his clothing, there's no logical explanation for that blood being there. Because if somebody, let's just say, for instance, that somebody beat him twice, he gets kicked in the head 2 or 3 times, he gets up and runs away, somebody else, multiple guys get a hold of him and beat him much more badly than that, more severely than that. including many kicks to the head, to a point where his nose is flat on his face when Maureen and Jerby see him. Obviously, Clayton had done a lot of bleeding. Obviously, if Clayton has done a lot of bleeding, there's going to be blood on his clothing. If there's blood on his clothing, when they find the body, they can't pass off the story that he was just running away and he fell in the brook and ended up dead. So if we're going to go with that story, we got to make sure there's no blood on his clothing. So we have to have his clothing dry cleaned before we put the body in the brook. That's my take.
Yeah, that's kind of how it all shook down, it seems. Like,
I could be wrong, but this is the way I there's no question that the clothes were dry cleaned somewhere along the way. And another part of it is the fact that when they got the clothing back, there were some of that black stuff still stuck to the clothes. So that, to me, that helps me identify when the dry cleaning took place, because if the dry cleaning took place after Clayton's body was taken to the hospital and his clothing was stripped from him, then when they sent the clothes away and they were dry cleaned, when they came back, there would be none of that black material attached to the clothing. But when the Millers got the clothing back, there was. So if they were dry cleaned earlier and Clayton was dressed in the town building before they put him in the brook, that could explain how the black material is stuck to Clayton's skin under his clothing.
yeah, that could be the reason for that too. Like, there was but even would you think that the cold temperatures, how it didn't stick to him, and then warming up, I guess, going on the gurney and whatnot, that have caused anything to for the resident?
I would say, Chris, that Clayton must have either been recently dead or conceivably even still alive when they took him there, because his body would have to be fairly warm, I would think, for the stuff like that to be sticking to it. I know it would probably stick to anything, but for it to stick as well as it stuck to Clayton, to stick well enough that his clothes are taken off and it didn't come off with the clothing, it's still actually sticking to his naked body. To me, I would figure that the body would have to have been somewhat warm when it made contact with that stuff for it to stick that well. But that's just my take on it. I could be wrong.
Yeah, and then like it just seeped through the clothes. Then like, yeah. The what was the other thing we were trying to go back on here? Oh, the slides from the doctor or whatever.
That's a good
The ones that
point.
he got sent, the ones that he got sent to him, and then they're like, oh, these are the wrong DNA slides. Yeah, we could touch base on that quick too.
Okay. Well, there are a couple of things there actually that when you bring up slides. When I speak of slides, or we speak of slides, what we're talking about is a very thin piece of tissue that was taken at the autopsy and placed between two glass slides so it can be observed under a microscope. That's what we talk about when we talk about slides, and it's tissue slide. It's piece of like I say, a very fine piece of tissue sandwiched between two small pieces of glass that they could then observe under a microscope. That's what we mean by slides. The other thing, when they create slides at an autopsy, the piece of tissue that they create the slide from is then wrapped in paraffin wax, and they call that a tissue block. A tissue block is basically a bigger version of a tissue slide, and the idea with the blocks is if at any time in the future you want to do any forensic testing or testing of any sort, medical testing, on samples from the autopsy, you take this tissue block and you take a slice off the end of it, and you use that particular slice to do your testing on, and then what's left of the block remains for the future. So typically at an autopsy, there are tissue slides created, tissue blocks created, and x-rays done. In Clayton's case, it has been claimed, it is claimed that when they brought the body to the hospital on Sunday, May 6, 1990, they arrived at the hospital at about 3 o'clock. That day, the RCMP later came to the hospital and took photographs. Members of the New Waterford Police, multiple members of the New Waterford Police were at the hospital that day. Two of the members of the New Waterford Police escorted Clayton's body to the X-ray department. One of them is the officer who told the Miller family that this wouldn't have happened if he hadn't gone back for his hat. Wayne Crow, who's telling this at 3:20 in the afternoon when the hat's not found until 3:45. Wayne Crow is also the guy who was supposed to have stopped the Millers from going to the body, but he drove away instead. He is one of those that escorts the body to the X-ray department that day. And they claim to this day, Nova Scotia Health Authority, that only 3 X-rays were created of Clayton when they brought the dead body to the hospital on Sunday. One of those is of Clayton's chest, AP, they call it, anterior to posterior, which means from front to back. One is of Clayton's skull, same thing, AP, anterior to posterior, if you were looking straight at the front of the skull. And the third is of the right side, the lateral right side of Clayton's skull. They claim that day when they brought the body there, they created no left side X-ray of Clayton's skull, no top, no back, no bottom. The only X-rays of anywhere on Clayton's body, supposedly, that were taken at the hospital that day are 3 X-rays, 2 of the skull and 1 of the chest, which obviously seems beyond unusual, particularly when the ambulance driver claimed that Clayton had a broken wrist. So why are there no X-rays taken of his wrists or his legs or arms or whatever? It's beyond logical that they would only have created 3 X-rays of Clayton's body, but that's what they claim, that there were only 3 X-rays taken when Clayton's body was taken to the hospital. But they also created a full set of blocks, tissue blocks and tissue slides at the autopsy, sorry. Now, when years later, after Clayton died in May of 1990, and in December of 1993, his body was exhumed from the grave so that a re-autopsy procedure could be performed. And when that was done, they brought a doctor from the other side of the country. His name is Dr. Butt, who they claimed was one of the top forensic pathologists in the country at the time. And the Miller family had requested that when this procedure was done, it be done by someone with no connection to Nova Scotia or Cape Breton or New Waterford Police, or they just wanted somebody with absolutely no connection whatsoever to any of this kind of thing, someone totally impartial. So the Nova Scotia government brought Dr. Butt from Calgary to perform the re-autopsy. And in a letter to the Millers, written in 1999, the provincial justice minister, who at that time was a gentleman by the name of Harrison, he states to them in a letter that the only reason Dr. Butt was brought here was because of his expertise and his knowledge, and that he has absolutely no previous professional connection of any kind with the government of Nova Scotia. The major problem with that statement is that if you go online right now and you look up Dr. John C. Butt, and you find it's called CV, I think it stands for Curriculum Vitae, it's Latin anyway. It basically means a doctor's resume. And if you read through Dr. Butt's CV, well into it, I think it's page 18 maybe, he has a list of people for whom he has been hired as a consultant in the past. And on his list of former consultations, he includes the fact that in 1991, he worked as a consultant to the Deputy Attorney General for the province of Nova Scotia on the establishment of the medical examiner system. This is 1991 that he did that. It's December of 1993 when the Nova Scotia government brings him to Cape Breton in order to conduct the re-autopsy on the remains of Clayton's body. And they tell the Millers in a letter from the Justice Minister that he has absolutely no prior professional connections with the Nova Scotia government before coming here in 93 to do Clayton's re-autopsy. That's total bullshit, because he was here in 1991 helping them set up the medical examiner system. Now,
Yeah.
when after he completes the re-autopsy on Clayton's remains
Mhm.
and flies back to Calgary in early January of 1994, the chief medical examiner for the province, at that time his name was Dr. Roland Perry, he sends to Dr. Butt in Calgary all of the tissue slides and tissue blocks from Clayton's original autopsy, which at this particular time, right now, that would never take place, because there is a law that prohibits mailing tissue blocks out of the province. If Dr. Butt needed samples from Clayton's original autopsy, slices should have been taken from those tissue blocks and those slices sent. That's the way it would be done now. In those days, times where the laws were a little bit different. Anyway, my point is, at that time, all the tissue blocks and all the tissue slides from Clayton's original autopsy are sent to Calgary to Dr. Butt, despite the fact that he has had a complete set of both created at the re-autopsy. Now, while he has those in his possession, he sends those tissue slides for examination by an expert doctor. Her name was Bernadette Fraser, and she worked at the Foothills Hospital, I believe. Excuse me. Dr. Fraser comes back in her report and tells him that she sees in the brain tissue slides, she sees an asphyxial element. Asphyxial element means signs of asphyxia, and asphyxia means deprivation of oxygen.
Right.
Dr. Butt, to this day, according to the current chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia, has never returned the 3 brain tissue slides, which were part of the initial 17 slides from the original autopsy that were sent to Dr. Butt in January of 1994. When he has sent 17 tissue slides and 17 tissue blocks, only 14 of those slides returned. The brain tissue slides have never to this day returned. And those are the slides which, when analyzed by an expert doctor, were claimed to have revealed an asphyxial element. Now, Dr. Butt's claim, as far as Clayton's cause of death, is that Clayton died from hypothermia. And hypothermia has nothing to do with asphyxia.
No.
If Clayton died from hypothermia, there is no logical explanation for Dr. Fraser having seen an asphyxial element, quote unquote, in Clayton's brain tissue slides. Now, I don't know if it's a coincidence or not, but Dr. Butt claims that Clayton died from hypothermia. And the brain tissue slides, which according to Dr. Fraser show an asphyxial element, have never been returned to Nova Scotia from Dr. Butt. So, is it a coincidence that slides, which if returned to Nova Scotia and handed over to us, to the Miller family or their lawyer, might reveal an asphyxial element in Clayton's death? Is it a coincidence that those have never come back from the doctor who claims that his death had nothing to do with asphyxia? it seems kind of strange to me that Dr. Butt claims that Clayton died from hypothermia, and there's no signs of asphyxia of any kind. While the expert that he sent the slides to says that the brain tissue slides show as an asphyxial element, and he never sends those slides back to Nova Scotia while he's claiming that hypothermia is the cause of death.
Well, even the asphyxiation, like that would come on from, say, a chokehold or what have you, right?
There are asphyxia can come about different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that. There's another little detail that nobody would know about, or very few. The 14 slides that were returned to Nova Scotia from Dr. Butt, we actually managed to obtain them from the current chief medical examiner, Dr. Bose, in a digital form. And we learned about the fact that there were doctors, this happened back in 2015, doctors in Brazil were conducting studies, the subject of which was the fact that some individuals who die from asphyxiation, at autopsy, their lungs show signs of emphysema, despite the fact that they didn't actually have emphysema during their life. But because of the fact that they died from asphyxiation, at autopsy, their lungs showed symptoms or some type of signs related to emphysema. Now, what we wanted to do, we got a hold of these particular doctors, not because of that study that they were doing in particularly, but we got a hold of these doctors who were in Brazil, far enough away that we thought for sure they wouldn't have heard about Clayton's case, and asked if they would consider examining 14 tissue slides that we had in digital form, and with no background information of any kind, tell us exactly what it was that they observed on these slides or in these slides, from these slides.
Mm-hmm.
And they agreed that they would. So we had Dr. Bose send them these slides, and they did their own professional examination of them. There were two different doctors involved. One was a lung pathologist. They specifically studied the lungs of dead people. And the other was a forensic pathologist who studies death in general, their consequences. And they sent us a detailed report of what they had found. And what they had found was that Clayton's death was the result of a lack of, or a complete lack of, anoxia or hypoxia, oxygen. Clayton's death was a result of, based on what they saw, particularly in his lung tissue samples, slides, that Clayton's death was a result of lack of oxygen. Now, they went on to explain that there are different situations that will result in that taking place. Their first suggestion was occlusion of the airway. And occlusion of the airway basically means your throat is blocked. If you swallowed a grape and it's caught in your throat and air can't get around it for you to breathe, then you can end up choking. You can die from asphyxiation because of the fact that your airway is blocked. Air can't get in, air can't get out. You can't breathe. You die. Another possibility is if you are in an environment that is deprived of oxygen. For instance, if you're a welder and you're working inside a big tank of some sort, and running of the torch and the flame and everything else is burning up the oxygen, and you're breathing in the oxygen and whatever, and there's only so much oxygen inside that tank, you could get to a situation where the deprivation of oxygen inside that tank means that there's nothing left for you to breathe, and as a result, you could end up in a situation where you die because you're on a job site somewhere and you're not properly prepared, and because you're in a confined space and the oxygen is now removed, you can die from that. The third possibility that they presented in their report is manual asphyxiation. He could have choked, or been choked, whatever. His airway is literally choked off from manual sources outside of his body. The reason I believe that they initially went with occlusion of the airway, or the blocking of the inside of the throat, is because they also included in their report 4 microscopic, or 4 photographs at different magnifications taken through a microscope. And what's in these 4 individual photographs is a foreign material within the lung tissue sample on the slide. They describe it in great detail, the color, the fact that it's birefringent under fluorescent light. They go into great detail about exactly what they see in this foreign object. And it's my belief that their first choice for how Clayton may have died was occlusion of the airway, because they probably believed that whatever this foreign material was that was in his lung might possibly have also been in his throat, blocking his throat. So their first choice was occlusion. Their next choice, when they're listing the possible options of how he died, first, with the number 1 choice that they said was occlusion of the airway, and I believe that that is probably why. Now, one of the really important things that the people need to know is that these same tissue slides that these doctors in Brazil are examining were also examined by Dr. Butt when he did the re-autopsy of Clayton's remains. When he wrote his report, in his re-autopsy report, he also included a section on his examination of these particular slides from the original autopsy, as well as the slides that he had created at the re-autopsy. Excuse me. So in his report, when he discusses these slides and is talking particularly about the lung tissue slides, he says specifically that there is no foreign material of any kind in the lung tissue slides. And these are the exact same slides that these doctors in Brazil have sent us 4 individual photographs at different magnifications of a foreign material in Clayton's lung tissue. The same one Dr. Butt says there's nothing there. These doctors in Brazil are showing us pictures of something that is there.
And that's wild how it's totally different from, one doctor saying this and these guys are like, here's your fucking proof.
Yep. Here's a picture that shows that there's a foreign material. You're saying that there's no foreign material. Another interesting part of all of this is he also, Dr. Butt, gives a detailed description of what he sees as far as the condition of the lungs. And when it's compared with the detailed description of what the doctors in Brazil see in the condition of the lungs, there is no comparison whatsoever. These doctors see multiple signs of Clayton's lack of oxygen, that he was choked, or that he certainly wasn't in an environmentally deprived oxygen situation, because he's found in a brook outside. So then it's not going to be that one. Anyway, they have no doubt of what they saw, and they give great detail about the damage that they see to Clayton's lungs, and that the damage to his lungs is from overinflation of the lungs. And overinflation takes place when, if your throat is being choked so that you can't breathe, your lungs are still fighting to expel the air, the oxygen that they contain within. And the longer that you go without being able to exhale that oxygen, the harder that your lungs are fighting to try and exhale them. So it shows up in multiple ways to those who recognize what they're looking at times like that. There are multiple signs to those doctors that there is overinflation here. Your lungs were unable to expel the air that they were containing, and that happens when you get choked. And they in great detail, they explain all the different damage that took place that they saw in Clayton's lung slides, and all they have to go on is Clayton's lung slides. Another interesting little tidbit is the fact that in January of 1994, when the slides and blocks were being sent out to Dr. Butt in Calgary from the chief medical examiner for the province of Nova Scotia, Dr. Roland Perry. He also included all material from Frank magazine referring to the case of Clayton Miller.
That's pretty cool.
Why is a doctor who has been here and conducted his own re-autopsy, why are they sending him material from a gossip rag, basically? Mind you, lots of it was accurate. Lots of stuff that was printed by Frank in those days was accurate. There were questions that the Millers were asking that to this day haven't been answered in a lot of cases. But it makes no logical sense that they're sending that material to a doctor who has just done his own re-autopsy. Why does he need to see that material? Does what the public says or what people think or what rumor has been passing around have any effect on what he's going to write up in his report?
Sure.
If it doesn't, why are they sending it to him? And if it does, it definitely shouldn't. Because if he's a professional, like he claims to be, and like the government of Nova Scotia claims that he is, he should have absolutely no need to read what's written in Frank magazine regarding Clayton's case before he writes up his re-autopsy report.
Like, yeah, like I said, like this case is all over the place with everything, man. And 33 years is a long fucking time, dude.
It is, and it's far from over yet.
Oh, and we're just scratching the surface on this, my friend.
It's a shit show like nothing. Nobody around here has seen anything quite like all of this.
No.
And people don't know that. People have no idea of the actual depths of the cover up is, I suppose, the best term, general term for it. But the underhanded stuff that goes on, like the level that they'll go to shut the Millers down from actually getting the truth. All they want to know is what happened to our son, what actually truly happened to our son. The main questions that the Millers have: what is Clayton's cause of death, and where was he on Saturday?
And that's all that they want to know. And they've been trying to fucking figure this out for that many years. And then they're throwing smoke screens here, and then they're, anything they say or whatever is fucking twisted around. Or, officers on duty like cover for each other and shit. Well, not so much cover for each other, but I mean, like, they'll lie, like one guy lies and then
Everybody else agrees to it. That's how it works. Yep.
yeah. And I mean, like, I hope like they do get this justice soon for them too. I mean, it's a long time, and like I said, like it's got to wear anybody down. Like life itself wears everybody down every now and again. And yeah, I know his father and Clayton were really close too, and like that's the whole reason. Like you'd see him down on Plummer Ave there with the signs, and he did that for what? How many years did he do that for?
He's still doing it, buddy. When I talked to Maureen yesterday or the day before, she said Jorby just came back from being uptown with the sign. For people who don't know, Clayton's father, Jervy, has carried a sign on his shoulder every day on the main street of New Waterford since way back when. I'm not exactly sure when it started. I heard Rick Howe saying the other day on a radio program talking about his new book that includes a chapter on Clayton's case about the fact that Jervy started this right back when Clayton died and has done it every day since. That's not accurate. I'm not entirely sure how long it was into the process that Jervy started walking with a sign, but he still to this day walks with a sign uptown in New Waterford, and the sign says, "Police killed Clayton." And part of his motivation for carrying the sign when he started out in the first place was he hoped that New Waterford police would file charges against him for walking through their town with a sign that says police killed Clayton. Because if you are police in New Waterford and you didn't kill Clayton, and there's a man walking up and down the street every day carrying a sign that says, I did kill Clayton, I might be inclined to want to take that guy to court and say he's slandering my name because I'm a police officer and I had nothing to do with killing Clayton Miller.
Yeah, but funny how nothing ever came about that, eh? It was all fucking quiet.
Jervy had in his mind, he had hoped that New Waterford police would actually file charges against him and bring him to court over that sign. Because if they did, evidence would have to be presented while they're in court.
Well, yeah,
and then it would be a whole different picture, because evidence that has never been presented, because Clayton's case has never been looked at as any kind of a crime, would actually have been presented. And there would have been lots of opportunity for Jervy to bring forth information that he has that suggests that the cops had something to do with Clayton's death. But that's never happened. In all these years of him carrying that sign, there's never been charges laid against him. Jervy has carried that sign long enough that now he's got serious arthritis problems on that one shoulder. And the reason that he's got the arthritis is from that 2x4 resting on his shoulder that the sign is attached to.
Fuck. God love him.
God love him. I wish God had shown him a little bit more that he loves him.
Yeah, and getting all this shit fucking solved. I mean,
give him some justice. Hurry up and give him some justice so he's got some time left to enjoy it.
Oh, exactly. And I feel for them over all these fucking years, man. Like, and to try to get this solved see, the whole reason with this podcast shit that I do, like it's, you know what I mean? It's to get more awareness out there for people that don't know. I mean, if somebody can think of something that happened that night, or, was with Clayton, or something jogs their memory and they can talk about it, something so small and significant like that could be a big fucking thing in this case too,
That is absolutely true, my friend. And we've had the good fortune to have someone come forth recently, actually. And it was someone who had information. It turned out that there was 2 or 3 different pieces of information that person gave us that were significant. And they had no appreciation for the fact that this little piece of information, and that's what they are in some cases, they're very small bits, but when added to what we already know or what we've heard from someone else, it can be very important to have something that supports something that someone else has said that might have been possibly doubtful, or something that makes us look at something that we had to consider, something that we hadn't never considered before. And all the, like, I don't know how many, it would certainly be many hundreds of hours at the very least that I've put into this stuff myself. And what that person came forward and told, and that person, they came to me, actually contacted me through Facebook and gave me information after something that I had posted in our Facebook group. We have a Facebook group that's called Justice for Clayton Miller. And I had posted something in that group. And this person had information regarding what I had posted. And they contacted me after reading that post on Facebook and said, if you want to know the details of that, just look up my statement, because I told in my statement that particular time, the time regarding what I had posted in the initial post on Facebook. He said, just look it up in my statement, because it's all there in my statement. Okay, the important part of that is that individual had no knowledge of the fact that we have never heard that they gave a statement to police, because the statement that they gave to police was withheld forever from the Millers. The Millers had no knowledge at any time of any kind that particular person had given a statement to police. So what ends up happening is, when we're requesting information, evidence in the case, it's the RCMP usually at this stage of the game that we're requesting it from, they'll come back to us and say, we need a complete list of exactly what information it is that you are requesting. that you think that we haven't provided you already or whatever. By the way, Clayton's case is the RCMP files in Clayton's case are somewhere in the range of approximately 22,000 pages now.
Jeez.
And that doesn't include 2,000 pages that they claim need to be withheld completely. 2,000 pages need to be withheld. Now, the average case of someone who fell in the brook and died, say, for instance, like they're claiming that this is in Clayton's case, the entire investigation wouldn't take up 2,000 pages. In this case, there are a full 2,000 pages that the RCMP claim need to be completely withheld from the Miller family. What the hell is written on 2,000 pages that is so serious that the Millers can't read it? Why, if there's nothing to see here, if there's nothing to hide, why are you hiding so much?
No,
That's one of the big things about all this. They claim that there's nothing to see here, but they won't let us see it. And when they finally did give the Millers the files, what they gave them was completely redacted. When they initially provided the Millers with 2 or 3 CDs that were supposed to be the evidence in Clayton's files, there was nothing that they could read on those CDs. That was when the lawyer who is now representing them, Ray Wagner, that's when Ray got involved, because they wanted someone on their behalf to request this information that they believe they should have had access to. It's Clayton's files. It's their son. It's his case. They are the ones that should have legal access to all the files if they wanted it.
Well, you'd think that.
They were told in the beginning that they had to wait for 20 years after Clayton's death to be able to get any of his files, which that was totally false. But they didn't know that, so they waited for 20 years.
And what happened in that 20 years with those fucking files? Yeah, wonderful.
Good question. What happened with those files? Well, there's a whole lot of them that apparently the RCMP claim that they've lost along the way.
Of course.
They claim to have lost the file regarding the investigation, the guy that turned up at the scene that day with the videotaping and investigation of the scene the day they found the body, the ID, they call him identification department guy. They claim that they've lost the file about his visit to the brook that day. And they also claim to have lost the videotape that was recorded by the RCMP at the re-autopsy of Clayton Miller's remains. Now, when I came across that paperwork in the files, I printed it off and I went to my father with it and I said, how about reading this for me, Dad? And he read it. And I said, what do you think about that? And he looked up from the paper, and my dad was he didn't say a whole lot. He'd get his message across pretty effectively, however. He looked up from the paper and he looked right at me in the face and he said, the RCMP do not lose files. He spent 40 years in the RCMP and he was as highly trained as you could be. And he would know that the RCMP don't lose files. Well, if the RCMP don't lose files, how the hell is it they've happened to lose those 2 right there, just like that? We know of for sure that they're admitting right off the bat that they lost. They don't lose them. They just don't want us to have them. That's all.
No, and that's so stupid, man. Like, the family needed all that information just to find out. All they want to know is what happened.
That's all they're looking for. They just want to know the truth.
That's it. And it sucks that they can't get the truth because everything's so topsy-turvy on this. Yeah.
Well, one thing about it, it's taken so long that through their own means, they know. By this point, it's not so much actually that the Millers are trying to find out the truth of what took place. They're trying to have the powers that be tell the public what took place and agree that what we know and that what we say and that what our evidence shows is the truth of what took place. Instead of this bullshit story that they've been peddling for all these years that keeps changing as it goes along. It's for a while it's this is the cause of death, then it's that is the cause of death. Another little tidbit that your listeners might like to know about is the fact that in 1991, the RCMP sent a letter to Dr. Riccigiani, who had performed the original autopsy on Clayton. And Dr. Riccigiani concluded that Clayton died from asphyxiation. But in the beginning, he was calling it dry drowning, which is something when the muscles in your throat contract and air or water or anything, and nothing is able to come or go to or from your lungs. It's asphyxiation. It's response to environmental conditions like very cold water hits your mouth and your throat closes over in response or something of that nature. Anyway, the bottom line is they were calling it dry drowning initially. And in 1991, an RCMP staff sergeant by the name of Burns sent a letter to Dr. Riccigiani, and in that letter, he requested that Dr. Riccigiani consider hypothermia as cause of death versus dry drowning or asphyxiation, as he had called it initially. And in his response to that letter, Dr. Riccigiani explains with great detail how it is impossible, based on his observations of Clayton's body at autopsy, how it is impossible that he could have died of hypothermia. At one stage, he says he saw no signs of hemoconcentration or slugging, which my understanding of the terms is that hemoconcentration and slugging refers to basically the thickening of the blood. Because what ends up happening when you die from hypothermia, you're exposed to very cold temperatures and your body responds in ways that end up with your blood literally getting thicker because it's not flowing fast enough through your body. And that's what he refers to when he says hemoconcentration. That would be the thickening of the blood being pumped through the body. Hemoconcentration and slugging. After that statement, he went on and made a list of 7 different items, none of which he observed. And he said, I saw no anoxic red patches on shoulders or knees, et cetera, on and on and on. These individual issues that should be observed on someone who has died from hypothermia. And at the bottom of that list of items, he said, in the absence of all of these items, it is impossible that Clayton Miller could have died from hypothermia. That's the doctor who did the initial autopsy on Clayton, saying, without any question, that based on what he saw, Clayton could not have died from hypothermia. But today, the official cause of Clayton's death is hypothermia. It's based on the fact that way back in the day, the lawyer representing the Miller family at the fatality inquiry contacted a doctor in Sydney named Dr. Glasgow and presented him with a situation. Clayton is found in the brook and whatever, and Dr. Glasgow comes to the conclusion that Clayton could have died from hypothermia based on the fact that he was found outside. Excuse me, supposedly after a couple of days of being outside, the official story says. And he is the one who initially suggested hypothermia, which to this day has become the official cause of death. However, in a conversation recorded by Clayton's father, Jervy, with Dr. Glasgow admitted to Jervy, he said, I would never have suggested hypothermia as a potential cause of Clayton Miller's death if I had been informed that when he was found, his body was found, his mouth and nose were submerged in the water of the brook. If he had known that Clayton was found with his mouth and nose underwater, he said he would never have suggested hypothermia as a possible cause of death.
Wow.
But he was found with his mouth and nose underwater, and to this day, they still claim that hypothermia is the cause of death.
Yeah. That's just so many fuck arounds with this case, man. And it sucks how it's like, okay, this is what we're gonna say that's gonna happen, and we're gonna stick to this, and nothing changes, you know?
Well, this is a prime example when they claim that hypothermia is the cause of death, and the Millers say hypothermia can't be the cause of death. Dr. Riccajani said that. Dr. Riccajani responded to Bob Burns' letter that it would be impossible for Clayton to have died of hypothermia. But when Dr. Bose, the current chief medical examiner, did his report on Clayton's case in 2015, he said Dr. Bose or Dr. Riccajani's reasoning is faulty, is flawed. What he says, basically, he says that Dr. Riccajani's reasoning is flawed. That what he says about hypothermia is false. That it couldn't have been a hypothermia is false. But despite the fact that Dr. Riccajani gives a very detailed scientific explanation of all these list of things that he did not see, which made it impossible for Clayton to have died of hypothermia, and completely supports his claim that it's impossible for Clayton to have died of hypothermia, Dr. Bose tells us, take my word for it, he died of hypothermia. And what Dr. Riccajani said was faulty. Okay, if what Dr. Riccajani says is faulty, tell us how it's faulty. Exactly what is it of his argument that you don't agree with or that science doesn't agree with? Instead of that, all he says is Dr. Riccajani's interpretation is wrong, basically. And instead of him, listen to me. He died of hypothermia. No, I'm not going to give you any scientific background for exactly why he died of hypothermia. Just take my word for it. That's the way that the Millers have been, the system deals with the Millers all through these years. They tell them whatever they want them to hear. They give them nothing whatsoever to support it. And that becomes basically the bottom line. From now on, this is it, because we say this is it. Never mind why we say that. We have nothing to support with the fact that we're saying that, but that's what we're saying, so that's what it's going to be. Dr. Riccajani gave a great detailed explanation of why it couldn't possibly be that, but they have never given a detailed explanation of why it should.
Yeah, that's not right at all. And everything should be backed up with facts or what have you, right? Like that even when I do this shit, like oh, now it's kind of funny. It's like, all right, well, I have my sources here, but half the sources on this Clayton case that are online are totally fucking bullshit. But I mean, you do need facts to back your stories up and everything else, right? It's just how it should go. But
And especially it should be that way with reports written by professionals.
yeah,
Investigators, and I use the air quotes around it, of course, because most don't investigate or don't want to investigate. But if you are an investigator, you want to ask these questions and you want to get the proper answers. And when somebody gives you an answer that doesn't go along with what you've been thinking so far, then you got to go down that avenue too and get the rest of that information and find out whether it's valid or not valid or whatever. You want to get all the information that you can and then go from there. There are so many examples in CERT's, the Serious Incident Response Team, when their investigation allegedly of they refuse to even interview people if that person has something to say about Clayton getting a beating or being beaten or anything, any knowledge of anything along those lines. They wouldn't even talk to the people because they claim that can't be true because Clayton wasn't beaten by anyone because there's no evidence that he was beaten. Well, there is a long list of injuries which are signs that Clayton was beaten or could be signs that Clayton was beaten. And even if you didn't think that way, anybody who's a proper investigator is going to talk to anybody who is going to offer them information. What you do is you talk to all the people, you get all the information. Then you start going through the information and saying, okay, well, this couldn't be true, or that can't be true because we know this, or we know that, or so-and-so told us this or that, or whatever. You don't just refuse to listen to what the person has to say because you don't think that what they say could be true based on the bullshit that you're pushing, that when you say that there's no signs of any injury. I mean, everybody who looks at Clayton's pictures is going to know that he was injured. Nobody looks at Clayton's pictures and says, oh, yeah, there's nothing. Obviously, he just fell in the brook and died, because you don't end up looking like Clayton ended up looking with that happening.
No. And
way because bad things happen to him. That's why he looked like that.
Well, even the pictures that you posted in the Justice for Clayton group, I'll actually add a link to that, to the group there when I'm done in the episode here. But yeah, like, man, it's like he totally got beaten up. And yeah, the way he looks, and then by the way that they say he just fell in the brook, there's totally no, it's not. It's two different things.
Yeah. Another really important thing, Chris, that has never been pursued, but is definitely part of the evidence without any question. When Dr. Butt did the re-autopsy, part of his re-autopsy report was his evaluation of what he saw in photos that were taken of Clayton's body at the hospital when it was brought there on May 6, 1990, which would have been 3 years, or basically 3 years earlier, 3.5 years earlier. Dr. Butt looked at the photos and made a determination regarding a subject which is called lividity. And lividity refers to where the blood travels to, basically where blood pools after you die and your heart stops pumping. It will show up looking almost like heavy bruising. What it is, it's actual blood settling. If you, for instance, if you died and you were laying on your left side when you died, your body would show dark blue along the left side of your body. If it was the lowest part, wherever the lowest part of your body is where the blood will actually sink to. Gravity pulls it there, basically, is what happens. When the heart is no longer pumping and there's no more blood pressure, the blood will just flow to the lowest points. If you were laying face down on your belly when you died, then they would see darker areas on your stomach and your front of your legs, whatever, because that's where the blood would be drawn to. In Clayton's case, Dr. Butt says clearly in the re-autopsy report that the lowest part of Clayton's body when he died was his lower legs and his feet, because of the lividity shown, the pattern of lividity that he sees in the pictures of Clayton's naked body. He specifically says his feet and lower legs, and that it is the lividity is circumferential, meaning the same on the front as it is on the back of his lower legs. Okay? You following me?
I am.
For me, the only way that you could have lividity in his lower legs that is the same on the front as it is on the back would be for his legs to have been upright at the time when the blood is settling in them. Imagine this. You've got a bottle of water, a plastic water bottle, and it's half full of water. If you lay the bottle on any side, tip it over on its side, only one side of the bottle is going to have water, right? Half it's going to have air, half it's going to have water. The bottom, the lower part is the part where the water is going to gather, and that would be the same if that was your leg, and there's blood in your leg, and now your heart is not pumping anymore. whatever side your leg is laying, whatever side is facing down to the floor, that's the side where the blood is going to collect. Can you follow me?
Yep.
So if Dr. Butt is claiming that the blood lividity in his lower legs is the same on the front as it is on the back, it's circumferential, it's all the way around.
Mm-hmm.
That could only happen if the legs are upright. Because otherwise, if he's laying on his back, the lividity is only going to be on the back side of his legs.
Correct.
If he's laying on his front, the lividity is only going to be on the front side of his legs.
Right.
What he specifically says is that the lividity in Clayton's lower legs and feet is circumferential. It's all the way around, and it is the same on the front as it is on the back. That could not happen that I can see unless the legs are up and down. If you've got a bottle of water half full and you've got the bottle upright, you've got water touching the front and water touching the back of the bottle, right?
Right.
When it's upright. But when you tip it over to any side, one side or the other, whichever way you want to tip it, it's no longer making contact with both the front and the back of the bottle. But if it's upright, when he says that it's the same on the front as it is on the back, to me, that could only take place if the legs, for instance, if Clayton is laying in a position somewhere where his legs are over the side of a bunk or a bed, or he's in the back seat of a car and his legs are upright when the heart stops pumping, then the lividity in the lower legs, which is where the Dr. Butt says there's no question that he says the lividity is most primarily located in the lower legs and the feet. And he specifically says that that means that the lower legs and the feet were lower than the rest of the body at that time.
Okay.
Now, that is a scientific fact that can be seen in the photographs and is not something to be argued one way or the other. That it either is or it isn't. And he says that is what he sees in those photographs, that the lowest part of Clayton's body when he died was his feet and his lower legs. Now, the crucial part for people to understand is that when Clayton's body was found, he was laying partially in the brook and partially on the bank of the brook. His face was in the water, and the water is the lowest part. Where the brook is, where the water in the brook is the lowest area, the lowest part of that area, that geographic area. That's why the water is there, because gravity pulls water to the lowest point when water is flowing down the brook. The bottom of the brook is the lowest part, or the water wouldn't be there. Clayton's face is in the water. His upper body is also in the water, but his legs and lower body are on dry land. He is laying face down at the time. His body is in rigor mortis, which means it's stiff. Both of his knees are bent, and we know that his knees were bent because you can see them in the hospital pictures that they took. When they took the body to the hospital, he's still in rigor mortis. Both knees are bent. So because his knees are bent and the body's in rigor mortis, when he's laying face down, his feet are actually in the air. His feet, because his knees are bent, are literally the highest part of his body. His face is the lowest part because it's in the water. His lower body is on the bank, his knees are bent, and his feet are in the air, meaning that when he is found, the highest part of his body is his lower legs and his feet. And Dr. Butt says specifically, with no question whatsoever in his report, that when he examines the photos of Clayton's body taken at the hospital, that the lividity is in his lower legs and his feet, which means the lowest point of Clayton's body when he died is his feet and his lower legs. When his body is found in the brook, his feet and his lower legs are the highest part of his body, the exact opposite of what the lividity shows in the photographs that's mentioned in Dr. Butt's re-autopsy report. That's a scientific fact presented by the doctor who did the re-autopsy that has been completely ignored by everybody ever since. It's absolutely impossible that Clayton died in the position that his body was found in the brook, if what Dr. Butt says about the lividity in the photographs is true. Because he says the lividity shows Clayton's lower legs and feet are the lowest part of his body when he dies. But when he's found at the brook, his face in the brook is the lowest part of his body. His feet are in the air because his knees are bent and his body's in rigor mortis. They are literally the highest point of his body. The last place that any lividity would go, if he had died in that position, would be his feet and his lower legs. The lividity would be in his face and his head, because that was the lowest point when his body was found.
Yeah. I don't know how it gets to that point. Um, like for him to believe his own fucking lies, kind of thing, right? Like, I don't know. There's facts that you can look at, and that's it. But to say that no, these facts aren't facts, this is my way or the highway kind of thing, it's fuck me. Yeah, I don't like that at all.
Well, if what he said was true, when he said that the lividity shows that the feet and lower legs were the lowest point of the body, if that's true, it is absolutely 100% impossible that the position that Clayton's body was found in at the brook is the position that he was in when he died. Because gravity is not going to suck blood up to his feet and lower legs when they're the highest point in his body. When the heart starts pumping, that stops pumping. That's not how it works.
No, it's gonna go to the lowest
Blood
point.
drains from there. It would drain from his feet and lower legs to the lowest point in his body. It's completely contradictory. The position of the body is completely contrary to what the doctor says that the photos show when it comes to the lividity in Clayton's body.
Right.
And that's scientific fact. That's photographs, and we still have those photos, and someone else could do the same. Take a look at them and say, yes, this is where the lividity is. If that is a fact, if it's a fact that that's where the lividity is primarily located, then it is also a fact that it is impossible for Clayton to have died in the position that his body was found in at the brook that day.
No.
It's a shit show, my friend.
No, and it always, hopefully it's not always will be, but yeah, this is why we're here, just
That's why we're here, yeah, I guess so.
to tell everybody, all the differences in this case, everything, from different point of views, from the cops' point of views, from everything that we have, well, you guys have researched, your documents, everything. This is why we want to spread awareness to this, and like I said earlier, like if somebody remembers something, get it to the right people and it'll come out.
That's a very big thing, Chris, that what you said right there, because there are lots of people who have lots of information about what took place that night or that weekend, and they don't understand how important what they know might be. It could be the smallest little piece of information that totally supports something else, or that points us down a different angle, a different direction that we weren't looking, or it affect whatever. If it affects our understanding of what took place that weekend, then it's important to us. And there are lots of people who have had information all these years, but they were scared. They were scared back from the beginning. And it's totally understandable that they might be scared, because the average person in New Waterford, well, at least half of the people in New Waterford think that New Waterford police beat Clayton to death. And if you're a friend of Clayton's, or you're someone who happened to be there that night and saw something that might be important, then you may have spent your whole life being afraid to talk about it, because you think that the cops killed Clayton, they can kill me too. And it was the same with parents telling their kids, shut your mouth. Don't tell anybody a word about what you saw, because if you do, you're putting yourself in danger, basically. So I can understand why people would have kept what they knew to themselves, growing up in Waterford. But
Well,
33 years passed. If you were 17 years old at that time, for instance, you're 50 years old now. And you shouldn't be scared at the age of 50 years old to tell what you know. Because
no.
most of those cops that you were scared of in those days are no longer on the force or alive in some cases. And things aren't the same as they used to be in the Waterford when it comes to how things are with the cops and all that type of thing. People who had legitimate reasons to be scared and to want to keep their mouth shut back in those days are no longer in that position. And we're at the stage now where lots of those people must have spent a lot of years containing information that they think the Miller should have had, and may have spent 33 years feeling guilty about the fact that they didn't tell them that information. I know that the person who came forward a couple of weeks ago to me and gave information that has helped us greatly, I know that that person feels a lot better now than they did before, because they realize now, without any question, that the information that they provided has helped us and has made a big difference in our understanding of exactly what took place that weekend. And now that person is feeling like they could very well feel that they're part of the team now too, that's helping to get justice for Clayton, because what they have given us is a substantial contribution, by giving us information that they've had all along. And the big thing in this particular situation is they automatically assumed that we knew everything that they had told the police, because they gave the police a statement back then. And all we have to do is read that statement to know what they knew. And that would be all well and good if the police were giving us all the statements from all the people that gave them statements, but that's not how it works. I started to mention earlier how we try to get information from the RCMP, for instance, and they want a list of what it is that we think that they haven't given us. Well, the problem with that is we don't know what they haven't given us. We don't know what people they've talked to and taken statements from that might be information that helps promote our understanding of things and what we've been saying all along. But if we don't know that person gave you a statement, we don't know to request that statement. In the case of this particular person, they came forward and said, if you want to know the details about that particular part of the story, just check my statement, because the times are all in there. I gave the times. Okay, but we didn't know that you gave a statement, so we didn't know to request that statement. And that's the kind of the 8 ball that we're behind. We don't know what we don't know. We're not aware of how many people they talked to through the years, or statements that they took from people and never told us about or provided us with, or any of that type of thing. So they've kind of got us that by that, in those terms. We don't know. All we have to go by is what they give us. And in some cases, if someone comes forward and tells us, like this particular individual, let us know that they gave a statement to police. Okay, now we know that we have to request that one, because we know that they gave a statement. But if they didn't tell us that, we would have no knowledge of the fact that they gave that statement. And they would have no knowledge of the fact that we didn't know their information. Someone who might be, totally on board with doing what they could to help, or excuse me, or whatever, they would just assume, okay, well, I gave my statement to the police, so they know what I told the cops back then, because I told it to the cops. Okay, well, that's only good if the cops tell us what you told them. If they decide that what you told them is important to what they want to keep, an important part of what they want to keep covered up, then we never learn about that statement. That if we don't know that you gave it, then we don't know what you told them in that statement. And so the details that people think that we would already have as part of our investigation, we may not necessarily have, because of the way the cops hold back information. So
yeah, and that's just wrong on their fucking levels. So yeah.
Well, sir, my phone is running out of power, and we're coming up on 3.5 hours since we started talking. So
we got off a little. Well, we kept on topic, I should say.
we'll call this one an episode with what we've got here, I think, or close to it, my buddy.
I think we can do that. I want to thank you very much for all your time here, Steve.
Well, hey, I'm just so happy that you're taking an interest in it, Chris, and that your listeners will get the details of some of the information involved that they wouldn't have had otherwise. This
Well,
is a
that's
very important thing for us to have you doing this because we can share information in our Facebook group to a point, but there's lots of things. There are so many important things that the public doesn't know that are very important. Um, Things like Wayne Crow being at the hospital trying to claim that this is about Clayton's hat before the hat's even found, or whatever. Lots of other things. Um, and the fact that you're taking an interest in it and allowing me to talk to you for 3 hours and a half in this particular case means that I can get a lot of information across that people wouldn't have otherwise. And that is something that both myself and the Millers and those that care about them really appreciate.
yeah, no, it's no issue at all. And like when my buddy ended up wanting me to cover this case, I knew a little bit about it, right? But my buddy John ended up calling Maureen, and she actually gave me the go ahead to cover this case or whatever. So I mean, I'm just trying to do what I can, and if there's anything I can do in the near future, I mean, I'm here, So thank you
Part of
very
it,
much.
part of it too, Chris, is that they can't speak with you themselves directly because they have an agreement with the people who are working on the documentary film series that's going to be coming out and hopefully next year.
Oh yeah,
Um, they signed an agreement with those people when they took on the project that they wouldn't discuss this with anybody as far as news people and whatever people that do stories like you're doing here, basically.
hmm
uh, until they, well, I'm not exactly sure. There was a time period involved in the beginning of it that they wouldn't, and then if they extended that or exactly how it's going. But I know that the bottom line is the reason that Maureen is not speaking with you herself is because of that agreement with those guys. And they definitely don't want to do anything to jeopardize that because
no,
that documentary series, when it hits the air, is going to be an absolutely huge thing for this case. They are so completely up to date on all the details of everything. The guy who's been at it the longest, by this stage, his knowledge of the facts that are in the files and everything else that goes with it is pretty much on par with my own. I've spent so much time talking to him and answering questions and providing him with information of all sorts that there are very few people that know the details of it the way he does now. So we're really looking forward to what's going to be coming out with that. It's going to be a series of episodes. They were talking initially about eight 1 hour episodes, I believe. Um, I'm not sure what the final, what it will look like when it's actually all said and done. But it's going to be a lot of episodes, going to be multiple episodes, and there's a lot of information to be conveyed. So, um,
sorry about the cutout there. Steve's fucking Steve's phone died there. So what Steve was trying to say, like, the reason that the parents can't discuss this case with me directly is because of the copyrights and everything for the new show coming up, which is totally fine. And I want to thank them for letting me have coverage to do this case, even though speaking with other members of the party here. So, thank you very much for everything on that. I want to thank Steve for all his hours and information and picking his brain throughout this whole episode and remembering like key points that you couldn't hear in the other episode because it was so fucking choppy. So what was happening there? It must be the connection between the app because I'm in Alberta, he's back home, and it's just when I try to speak sometimes and he tries to speak at the same time, it gets choppy, and then when I shut up, you can hear him, and when I start to talk, it kind of cuts out a little bit, but that didn't happen this time, so I apologize for uploading the other episode, and I felt bad because this other lady was like, I can't hear anything, and I'm like, ah, shit, well, I'll go check out the episode, and it wasn't the best, but I do apologize for the audio issues, and I want to say Thanks to all my listeners for everything that you do, the follows, the likes, the shout-outs, everything. And there's a lot of other podcasters that I've met along the way that help me through my days, and I don't want to fucking do an episode. And you know what I do? I write down things, I research, and I do a fucking episode. Because you guys deserve more things from me too, and I'm just not trying to be like, hey, I'll give you an episode whenever. I'm just trying to keep things interesting for you guys. Like, I'll give you guys an episode, and I'll pop something completely different off that I have been working on. So, just trying to stay relevant and fresh is all, right? So, thank you very much for tuning back into Twisted Tales. I'll have something else for you here in a bit. Thank you, guys. Everybody take care. Have a good rest of your weekend.
Twisted Tales.